On Father's Day, my son visited with a bouquet of white daisies and asked a question that made my heart stop. Dad, is she still bringing you $4,200 every month? Standing in that rundown kitchen, I had no words. For 10 months, I'd been scraping by on charity rationing my arthritis pills just to get through each day while my daughter-in-law had been pocketing that money without a second thought. But the lying was only part of what she'd done. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. Glad you're here with me today. If stories like this one speak to something in you, I'd be grateful if you hit that subscribe button and gave this a like. It helps more people find us. Before we go further, let me ask you something simple. If you suspected someone close to you was hiding something serious, would you say something right away, or would you wait and watch? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. A quick note before we begin: some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. A quick note: certain details have been fictionalized to give the story shape. The lesson underneath is what matters. Father's Day. Derek walked through my door with white daisies and 4 words that knocked the breath out of me. Dad Celeste's been dropping off the $4,200 every month, right? Most mornings that summer looked the same, me at the counter going through community food bank boxes, sorting cans by date, the way you do when donated goods are what stands between you and an empty shelf. Arthritis had been at my hands for years by then, bending the joints into shapes that didn't work right anymore. The house itself had gone quiet in a different way. 30 years of marriage will do that to the walls when the other person is gone. Lorraine and I used to start every morning at that nicked oak kitchen table back when getting up didn't cost me, when the pill bottles weren't rationed down to half doses just to stretch the month. Derek climbed out of his black Audi looking like exactly what he was, a man who'd made it. 35 years old, running Colton Systems, an automation software firm with contracts spread across the Southeast. The Georgia heat was already working on his collar, but the smile he brought up the walk was honest. Happy Father's Day, Dad. I'd arranged those daisies in a mason jar, and he'd taken Lorraine's chair, the one I still couldn't find a reason to move, and that's when he started the question he never finished. You're looking thin. His eyes went to the food bank boxes along the counter. Are you getting enough to eat? I've been sending. He stopped himself. My coffee cup went still in midair. Son, I said, and set it down. Nothing's come through. Not a dime. The blood left Derek's face. What do you mean I've been sending it every month for 10 months straight? $4,200 each time. She told me she was handling it in person, making sure you had everything you needed. $42,000. That figure settled between us in the sticky June air like something with weight to it. 10 months of wire transfers, 10 months during which I'd been deciding whether to pay the heating bill or buy groceries, splitting my arthritis prescription in half to double how long it lasted, eating off food bank charity, and a Social Security deposit that barely touched the utilities. 10 months of my daughter-in-law telling my son she was taking care of me. 10 months of lies. Derek, I've run into Celeste maybe 3 times since those Atlanta contracts started, I said, holding my voice flat, the way 3.5 decades of engineering work had trained me to. Establish the facts. Deal with the rest afterward. She came by with wine once. Stopped in twice to chat. Money never changed hands. Derek's fingers went pale where they gripped the table. Where has it been going? I scheduled those transfers for the 18th of every month, making sure you'd always. Then her expensive heels clicked on my front porch. That open door I'd left cracked for the summer air suddenly felt like it had been set up as a cue. Celeste filled the doorway. 33 years old, wrapped in silk that probably ran more than my electric bill. The smile was exactly calibrated, bright, unhurried, giving nothing away. You two having such a sweet Father's Day chat, she said, one shoulder resting on the frame. Derek, honey, you didn't tell me you were stopping by early. Derek swung toward her, alarm cracking through his expression. Celeste. Dad says he hasn't been receiving the money, not a flicker of hesitation. Behind those eyes, something computed fast, quiet. Then the show started. Oh, sweetheart. Didn't I explain this? I set up a special retirement fund as a surprise for both of you. Gerald's too proud to accept a straight cash transfer, so I've been building something better. That steady smile never wavered as she looked at me. Derek let out a long breath, and I watched his shoulders drop. I sat there and watched my daughter-in-law take a bow for charity I'd been surviving on. 2 things landed in my mind at exactly the same moment. She had stolen $42,000. And standing in my kitchen right now, she had just handed me my opening. She hadn't known the transfers fell on the 18th. 35 years of building systems had given me one rule I never forgot. Design it so the process holds even when the person can't. That night after Derek's black Audi cleared my driveway and Celeste's polished performance finished echoing through the house, I walked out to my garage. Not after the lawn equipment or the holiday storage. I went for the metal case I'd carried out of my last day at the Macon manufacturing plant, the toolkit from my years building automated assembly lines. Dusty now stacked behind boxes of Lorraine's things I hadn't been able to face in the 3 years since the funeral. But I lifted the lid under that single bare bulb and found everything undisturbed right where I'd left it. Precision screwdrivers, wire cutters, voltage testers, and 3 miniature surveillance cameras, the kind we'd run for quality control monitoring on the factory floor. Industrial built, capable of months of continuous recording, each one no bigger than shirt buttons. If Celeste had decided she was dealing with a man too old and too broken to fight back, she had never watched me engineer a solution. My hands were unsteady, carrying the case inside, but that was the arthritis, not nerves. 30 years of assembly work had left muscle memory that didn't check with my joints before it moved. I cleared the nicked oak kitchen table, the very surface where Celeste had sold her retirement fund story a few hours earlier, and laid everything out. I mapped the placement the same way I used to plan a factory floor coverage, first exposure, second. The kitchen anchored the plan. I set the first lens inside the decorative molding above the refrigerator angle calculated to frame both the water filter I touched every day and the stove where my rationed meals got heated. If she came back with another story, the camera would catch it from the first step through the door. My fingers slipped on the screws twice. The work was slower than it would have been 2 decades back when I could stand on a step stool without my knees filing a complaint. But I'd once run conveyor lines that shuttled half-ton engine blocks to within a millimeter. 3 cameras were well within reach. The second position needed thought. I fit that camera into the crown molding over the front entrance clean sightline to anyone stepping inside, covering the full entry. The coat rack, the mail table, and the couch where Derek had been sitting when Celeste made her entrance, all of it in frame. This wasn't a home security setup. It was a record that couldn't be leaned on, worn down, or talked out of what it saw. The third went into the hallway outside my bedroom door, aimed at the nightstand and the threshold. Her comfort level moving through my house this morning had bothered me. More than the retirement fund performance, she'd navigated these rooms like someone who'd been through them more than 3 times. If there was a key she hadn't been given, if she'd been coming through while I was at the pharmacy or the food bank, I needed it documented. By 9 o'clock, all 3 cameras were seated and invisible to anyone not looking for them. The recording unit went into the bedroom closet behind shoeboxes and old boots, power running through the wall on a cord I'd fished through using plant floor technique. But hardware alone wasn't the whole answer. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, 5 years old, a gift from Derek, mostly used for email and arthritis forums. The system would keep running whether I could or not. Lorraine watched me from the wedding photograph on the mantle, that silver frame holding the light the same way it always had across 30 years. She used to tell me my methodical streak would pay off one day, gave me grief about triple redundant grocery lists and backing up my backups. I don't think either of us pictured it being necessary against family. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said quietly to her picture. "You always pushed me toward more trust. But trust is something you build on evidence. I was out of the other kind." I took a legal pad from the desk. Numbered lines, the same format I'd used for technical documentation my whole career, and printed 3 words across the top of the first page. Evidence, not emotion. Then I started back at the beginning, 10 months prior, reconstructing events the way I'd once written up mechanical failure reports, methodical, sequenced, no room for interpretation. Every time Celeste had come through that door, logged with what I could fix to a date. Every bill that had gone to final notice while Derek believed I was comfortable. Every prescription I'd rationed like a parts allocation problem, trading dosage against duration. June 2023. First transfer issued per Derek's account. Nothing received my end. Community food bank begins filling the gap. July 2023. Second transfer. Celeste visits once, brings wine, stays 20 minutes. Electric bill reaches final notice. August 2023. Third transfer. Medication cut to half the prescribed dose. Pain climbs, but the bottle lasts twice as long. Page after page, the same pattern each month. A line item, each missing payment traced to its consequence. All of it set down in the spare language of a man who'd spent a career where sloppy documentation cost you. By 11:30, I had 11 pages. Dates, dollar amounts past due notices, medical trade-offs made because money owed to me had been redirected into Celeste's wardrobe and whatever else she'd decided my survival was worth to her. And I still hadn't opened the bank records yet. 11 pages. I set the legal pad down and stared at what I'd built, a complete record of 10 months of theft laid out in my own hand. The timeline held together. The cameras were live. The cloud backup was running. None of it would hold up in court. Her word carried the same weight as mine. Her retirement fund story stood against every note I'd written. Come morning, I'd make the 4-block walk to First Heritage Community Bank and ask for a full transaction audit on Derek's account. Hard numbers, dated entries, the sort of evidence no amount of practiced charm or financial double talk could make disappear. What I hadn't reckoned with yet that visit would show me she'd outmaneuvered me before I'd even laced my shoes. The walk felt longer than it should at 60 with arthritic knees, even though I'd covered that same ground hundreds of times across 30 years. In the years when Lorraine was still beside me. In the years when I believed the people closest to me. Father's Day was 2 days behind me now. Derek's question, Celeste's perfectly timed appearance, all of it still sitting fresh and unresolved. Footage rolling, record documented. What remained was the one thing that couldn't be argued into ambiguity: transaction data printed and time-stamped, proving the money Derek had wired never landed in my account. Georgia's summer humidity had already settled over the street like a wet blanket as I pulled open the bank's heavy glass door at exactly 9 o'clock. The smell reached me before anything else, coffee paper and the particular edge of overworked air conditioning losing its seasonal argument with June. The faded navy carpet still showed the ghost of old traffic lanes worn in by years of customers, including the route Lorraine and I had taken together the day we opened our first joint account in 1994. Nadine Hollis was at her station working through a stack of deposit slips with the same unhurried care she'd brought to the table 3 years back when she'd walked me through the account paperwork in the weeks after Lorraine died. 50 or thereabouts, gray blonde hair cut close and sensible reading glasses suspended from a beaded chain at her collarbone. "Morning, Mr. Colton," she said, and her warmth was the real kind. "How can I help you?" I laid my worn passbook on the counter, a relic most people had traded in for apps long ago. "Nadine, I need everything on my transaction history. 10 months back minimum. What I'm after specifically is any inbound transfers originating from my son Derek's accounts." Her hands moved across the keys with the practiced ease of someone who'd sat at that same post for 2 decades. I tracked her eyes as they swept the screen down, then back, then down again, and watched the small crease appear between her brows. The quiet stretched past comfortable. "Mr. Colton, I'm sorry," she said at last, looking up with apology she wasn't faking. "There's nothing here at all. No transfers, no deposits tied to any Colton account. What I see is your Social Security direct deposit arriving on the 3rd each month and modest interest. That's the full picture." Even braced for it, hearing it stated plainly landed hard. 10 months of support confirmed missing. My son had been sending the money. It had never arrived. And the record was now telling me it had never been sent. "Run it again," I said, voice flat. "Derek scheduled automatic transfers the 18th of every month, $4,200. The apology in Nadine's face shaded into something closer to alarm. She pulled up additional screens, entered new queries, the composed front she wore on the job starting to show cracks. "Mr. Colton, I've got your full account history going back 2 years in front of me. Outside of your government deposits, there's no inbound movement of any kind. The record is spotless." Spotless. 35 years working in engineering had given me a reliable instinct for the difference between a malfunction and an act. This was an act. "Nadine." I kept my voice low and leaned toward the counter. "I need you to look at the internal access logs, find out who's pulled up my account recently." A pause. Customers didn't make that kind of request. It fell outside the usual script entirely. But she'd watched me age through this bank. She'd been here through Lorraine's death, had probably registered without ever saying so, the way my clothes had grown threadbare and the coin deposits had stopped. Because there were no coins left to deposit. "Give me a moment," Nadine said quietly, dropping her voice. A long beat while she read the screen. Then she raised her eyes to mine. "Mr. Colton, the internal system logs aren't something I'm able to hand over without a formal request going through the right channels. What I can say is, what I'm looking at doesn't add up for an account that was supposedly receiving regular deposits. You need to file a written fraud inquiry today." She pushed a form across the counter, keeping eye contact. Today, Mr. Colton, before this branch closes. A quick glance over her shoulder at the back offices. Before she rotated the monitor away, I caught the name beside the 6 a.m. administrative deletion entry. Conrad Ashby. Bank manager, 38 years old, the kind of man whose suits cost more than my grocery bill for a month, who handed longtime customers the same polished greeting Celeste had down to a science. She'd had eyes on me not just this week, not just since yesterday, but for months running. 2 hours before I walked in, I said mostly to myself. Nadine gave a slow nod, hands still resting on the keyboard like she didn't trust herself to move them. Mr. Colton, this falls outside of normal operating procedure. If administrative credentials were used to erase transaction records, I said, that's destruction of evidence. The thought finished itself before she could respond. I ran the sequence back through my mind, each step mechanical and exact. The decision to come here had come to me the prior night around 11:30 after I'd finished writing everything up. I'd told no one, hadn't phoned ahead, hadn't breathed a word to Derek or Celeste or anyone else. Yet at 6 o'clock that same morning, 3 hours after I'd made the call, 2 full hours before I pushed through that glass door, someone had logged into my account and wiped the slate. My cameras had been recording inside the house for 2 days straight. If Celeste had slipped in while I was asleep and read my notes or caught me planning out loud, I'd have her on tape. But the colder explanation had already taken root. She hadn't needed to come inside. She'd had my destination before I'd even put on my jacket. Nadine, I said, measured and deliberate, I need you to print every log you're able to pull, anything tied to that deletion, and I need you to log the precise time I'm making this request. Her hand had a slight tremble as she sent it to the printer. Mr. Colton, with fraud potentially involved, you really should be contacting. I will, I said, pulling the warm pages from the tray, but I need to know the full shape of this first. The picture was coming clear. Derek had sent the transfers. Someone had caught them in transit. That same person had the reach to access banking infrastructure and the standing to use administrative credentials to erase what they'd done, Conrad Ashby's credentials to be exact. And Celeste had known I'd be standing at that counter 2 hours before I arrived. I thanked Nadine and made my way home at a slow pace, turning the evidence over the way you'd lay out faulty components on a workbench, hunting for the point of failure. 2 hours lead time. Enough to cover the tracks. Enough confidence to delete records from a secured financial system without flinching. The missing money was still a question, but it had been overtaken by a bigger one. How had she known I was halfway home before the answer surfaced? It had been in my pocket the whole time, riding there for months, something I'd never once questioned. The device had been transmitting Celeste's real-time view of my every move all day, every day. I settled into my living room chair that afternoon with the phone resting in my arthritic hands, feeling denser than its weight had any right to be. The walk back from First Heritage had been long enough to reason through how Celeste's system worked. She'd had a 2-hour window before my arrival. She hadn't gone through my papers. She hadn't run a tap on my line or hidden anything in the walls. She'd simply watched me move. A memory from 3 months ago flooded back with sudden precision. A Tuesday afternoon, no warning. Celeste, at the door carrying a cell phone store bag, warmth dialed up to maximum. Derek wants you to have a real smartphone, Dad, she'd said, her voice thick with performed concern. That old flip phone is a liability if something goes wrong. Let me get it set up for you. At 60 years old, arthritic hands struggling with tiny touchscreens, I'd been relieved. Here was my son's wife, unhurried and patient, guiding me through the whole process. She'd positioned herself just behind me, her perfume heavy and close, her fingers moving across the screen in sequences I couldn't track. This health app logs your steps. She'd told me that, manicured finger tracing the display. Good for keeping an eye on activity levels with your arthritis. Just approve the permissions. I had. Every single one. Now I sat in that same chair and took the phone apart the way I'd once torn down malfunctioning equipment, methodically starting with the battery, then down into settings, into background processes, into application permissions. The GPS tracking software was 3 menus down, tucked beneath a generic health monitoring label, installed from Celeste's account. Continuous location access authorized. Pinging an unregistered number every 60 seconds. For 3 months. 3 months of her watching me make the 4-block walk to church on Sundays. 3 months of logging every trip I made to the pharmacy where I was picking up half-dose prescriptions because I couldn't stretch the money to cover the full amount. 3 months of noting every grocery run, every doctor's visit, every time I stepped outside. Nothing had stayed private. Nothing had remained my own. For 3 months, my daughter-in-law had watched me split pills at the counter and said nothing. She'd watched me weigh heat against food and choose, watched and kept taking. My first impulse was to tear the application off the phone entirely, rip out that intrusion with the same rage that was climbing up through my chest. But 35 years working with complex systems had ground one lesson into me. Disciplined thinking beats a hot reaction every time. Pulling the app would announce to Celeste that I'd found it. She'd recalibrate, grow more guarded, shift her methods. But if I left it running, if I let her go, on believing she still had eyes on me while I decided what she saw, that was leverage. I set the phone face down on the nicked oak kitchen table and left it there. The old two-way radio from my workshop days was out in the garage, dusty but in working order. Wendell and I had run similar equipment back when we were coordinating operations on the factory floor. Celeste could monitor that phone to her heart's content. I'd fall back on communication methods that predated the device entirely. I pulled up my laptop and began working through the camera footage from the past 3 days. The cameras had been running since Father's Day, and I was reviewing the recordings for the first time. Files had been uploading to Wendell's cloud server in 6-hour blocks, each one time-stamped and sorted. I pulled up the overnight recording that bridged June 16th into the 17th. The first 3 hours showed nothing darkened rooms, the occasional groan of settling wood, the refrigerator compressor kicking on and going quiet. Then at 2:03 a.m., the front door swung open. Celeste walked into my house using her own key, moving with the ease of someone for whom this was routine. She had on casual clothes, yoga pants, a hoodie, nothing resembling the tailored silk she'd worn on Father's Day. Hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked younger that way, less polished and absolutely terrified. She crossed my living room in tight circles for half a minute, eyes dropping repeatedly to her phone. Then it rang. She picked up on the first ring and stepped out onto the front porch looking for cover. The camera I'd mounted there caught her profile, cleanly picked up every word she pressed into that phone. "Ryland, I'm dealing with it." The hiss in her voice had nothing in common with the composed performance she put on during daylight. What came through the recording was unvarnished fear, a woman pleading with someone who held something over her. "Give me 3 more weeks, I promise. I'm working on the insurance angle now. He's old. He's sick. 3 more weeks." She went quiet, absorbing whatever Ryland was saying on the other end. Then, "I know what you said. I know what happens if I don't pay. 3 weeks, that's all I need." She ended the call and stood motionless on the porch for a full minute, hands trembling, chest heaving as though she'd just sprinted a mile. Then she rebuilt herself visibly, shoulders squaring, face going blank, and let herself back out of the house as quietly as she'd come in. I went back through the footage twice, making notes with the same methodical care I once brought to documenting equipment failures. Ryland male voice, though I couldn't make out words through the phone. 3-week deadline. Celeste terrified, not performing. Insurance angle. He's old, he's sick. She was talking about me. Who was Ryland, and what happened when those 3 weeks expired? I didn't know the man's name or face. But I knew what real desperation looked like. I'd just watched it move through my living room at 2 in the morning, heard it crack, a practiced liar's voice open. She owed someone who frightened her more than the prospect of being caught stealing from family. Someone who'd drawn a line in the sand. And frightened people take frightening actions. I shut the laptop and wrote the name in my legal notebook. Ryland, 3 weeks. Celeste, scared insurance angle. The diverted support payments weren't simply greed at work. They were being funneled towards someone who had a hold on Celeste. Someone with enough power over her to make her voice shake in the dark. The shape of the problem had changed. It was no longer just about how much she'd taken or where it had ended up. It was about what she would do when those 3 weeks closed out and I was still alive, still the obstacle standing between her and whatever debt she carried. I needed help, not Derek. He was bound too tightly to Celeste, too open to her influence. I needed someone who could move through company records without tripping Celeste's awareness, someone with discipline and judgment I could trust completely. I needed Wendell, and I needed him coming in through the back where a GPS trace on an old widower's phone wouldn't flag an incoming visitor. The knock landed on the back door rather than the front, and that told me everything before I'd crossed the kitchen to look. The visitor approaching from the back entrance understood something Celeste didn't. Men who'd put in 3 decades of hard engineering knew the difference between the door people watched and the one nobody bothered with. Through the kitchen window, I made out a figure in worn canvas overalls and electrician's tool bag. In one hand, a caterpillar cap pulled low, but I recognized him immediately beneath all of it. Wendell Pruitt, friend for 30 years, Derek's chief accountant at Colton Systems. Wendell Pruitt, 58, and as sharp as the afternoon, I'd first met him at church back when Derek was still in grade school, lifted the bag in a small salute and mouthed "plumbing problem" through the glass, keeping the cover story intact before he'd even set foot inside. I unlocked the door, and he moved in quickly, lowering the tool bag to the kitchen floor with a muted thud. "I stayed away from the front for a reason," Wendell said, pulling off the cap to show silver-streaked hair and a pair of eyes that inventoried a room in one pass. "Your phone has been broadcasting location data to an unregistered number for 3 months. I've been pulling the metadata off Derek's company server." The relief that moved through me was sharper than I'd anticipated. "You already knew about the tracker." "I know about quite a few things," Wendell said, unzipping the coveralls to show the button-down and slacks he always wore underneath. "That's what brought me here." "Derek authorized it last night," Wendell added before I could form the question. "As CEO, he signed off on my access to the relevant records for a fraud investigation. Everything I'm about to lay out has been documented through proper legal channels." $42,000, Wendell said, turning the laptop screen to face me. 10 monthly transfers of $4,200 each, exactly as Derek had authorized, but look at where they were routed. I leaned in my reading glasses, slipping down as I worked through the transaction details. Every single transfer pointed to the same destination, a joint account carrying 2 names, Celeste Colton and Conrad Ashby. Conrad Ashby. I said aloud, the name landing like something metallic on my tongue. "The bank manager who wiped the transaction logs." "The very same," Wendell confirmed. "They've been coordinating from the start. Celeste supplies the forged authorizations, your signature, your supposed cash delivery requests. Conrad routes the transfers into their shared account, and then scrubs the evidence out of your personal banking records. Precise, methodical, engineered to be invisible." For the first time in 4 days, something shifted in my chest that wasn't cold fury. It was the first faint edge of hope. "How long have you been sitting on this?" I asked. Wendell dragged one of my kitchen chairs over and settled into it with the weight of a man who'd been carrying something heavy by himself for a long time. "I started picking up irregularities 3 months back. Unusual patterns in Derek's accounts. Authorizations carrying what looked like your signature but didn't fit normal protocols. Nothing dramatic, the kind of thing an outside auditor would walk past. But I've worked Derek's books for 15 years. I can tell the difference between a clean transfer and one that's been dressed up to look clean." 3 months, I said. "The same window as the GPS tracker. You knew for 3 months and never came to me." "I suspected," Wendell said, and his voice was firm about the distinction. "Suspecting and knowing aren't the same thing, Gerald. If Celeste had been delivering your money in cash the way she claimed, my suspicions would have been wrong. I'd have blown apart Derek's marriage, accused his wife of fraud, shattered his family, and had nothing to show for it." He brought up another spreadsheet, withdrawal records, cash handling logs laid out in columns. "I needed you to confirm the payments never reached you before I could move. As chief accountant, I can't level that kind of accusation at the CEO's wife without solid evidence and the family's knowledge. The exposure alone would—" "You were shielding Derek," I said quietly. Wendell gave a single nod. "Your son is a decent man. The idea of sitting across from him and telling him his wife had been robbing his father." He shook his head. I had to be sure. Completely sure. "So I've been constructing the case piece by piece, every transaction logged, every authorization held up against the originals, every deleted entry rebuilt from the backup servers. He'd been looking out for my son even while building a file on my son's wife. That kind of loyalty is hard to find. Now I have your 10-month timeline," Wendell continued, gesturing at the screen. "It lines up exactly with my financial records. You never saw a single one of those support payments. Celeste and Conrad rerouted every dollar. We have what we need to move forward." Conrad Ashby had turned a position of institutional trust into a personal extraction operation. The man whose job was to safeguard deposits had been stealing them, and Celeste had either brought him in or he'd brought her in. It didn't much matter which. Together they'd assembled a system designed to quietly drain me dry while I rationed my medication and counted my groceries. "What about the GPS tracking?" I asked. "When did that begin?" 3 months back, same time I first spotted the irregularities," Wendell said. "I think Celeste suspected someone was watching the money trail. The tracker was her insurance, keeping tabs on your movements, making sure you didn't show up at the bank or speak to anyone who might notice what was missing." She wiped the bank records the morning I went in to verify the transactions, I said. I know. Nadine Hollis called me that afternoon worried about the deleted logs. That's the moment suspicion became active evidence destruction. Wendell shut the laptop and looked at me the way a man looks when he's about to drop something heavier. Gerald, the $42,000 is only what moved through Derek's company accounts. There's more. Considerably more. The kitchen seemed to drop a few degrees. How much more? Wendell opened the manila folder and distributed documents across the nicked oak kitchen table the way an investigator lays out a case. He worked with the deliberate order of an accountant, every sheet placed with intent. 2 separate stacks took shape. The first I already recognized transfer records, the diverted support payments. The second stack was thicker. Corporate credit card statements printed on company letterhead. The $42,000 moved through falsified transfers, Wendell said, pressing a hand to the first pile. But that's only part of it. She also had access to Derek's corporate card. He pushed the credit card statements across the table page after page of charges, the same 10-month window. American Express corporate gold card issued to Colton Systems authorized user Celeste Colton. $28,500, I said, reading the summary figure at the foot of the last page. My voice came out flat. The shock had already passed through me. What settled in behind it was colder and quieter. On a company credit card. Wendell confirmed the card was supposed to cover legitimate business costs, only travel, client dinners, office supplies. Derek had extended access to Celeste, thinking she'd help manage meal charges when he was on the road. Wendell pulled out individual receipts and arranged them in order by date: high-end spa treatments in Savannah, weekend getaways to Charleston, designer clothing from boutiques that don't post prices, jewelry, and on nearly every receipt showing a traceable signature, Conrad Ashby's name appeared alongside hers. I picked up the first one with hands that had begun to tremble again. Habersham House Spa, Macon, Georgia. Services rendered: full-day luxury package massage, facial body treatment. Total $1,200. $1,200 for a single afternoon at a spa. I'd stretched $17 across a week of groceries last March. Split my arthritis prescription in half to make it run twice as long. Weighed heat against electricity in February. And she'd spent $1,200 on a massage. There are more, Wendell said quietly, nudging another stack toward me. Hotel receipts. The Pontchartrain in Charleston, $3,600 for a weekend. The Planters Inn in Atlanta, $2,800. Luxury suites, room service, spa charges billed to the room. I moved through them without feeling much. My engineer's habit of cataloging details held the door shut on the rest of it. Because if I let the full weight of this land, I'd put my fist through something and that wouldn't return $1 or put Celeste behind bars. Designer boutiques. Wendell kept producing receipts. $8,000 at a clothing shop in Savannah. $5,000 at a jewelry store in Charleston. $3,000 on shoes whose brand name I couldn't begin to pronounce. 10 months. Every single month, she'd drained my support payments and turned them into luxuries I'd never been able to afford in 30 years of working. Conrad authorized every charge, Wendell said, running his finger along the signature lines on the credit card slips. As bank manager at First Heritage Community Bank, his sign-off bypassed the standard corporate card review. Derek's company protocol requires secondary authorization on anything over $500, but Conrad's institutional position gave his signature automatic weight. The system processed his approvals without routing them for human review. He weaponized his job, I said. Exactly. He turned a position of trust into an instrument of theft. Wendell produced another document, dense columns of technical data. IP address logs from First Heritage Community Bank's internal server. The deletion on June 17th had originated from Conrad Ashby's office terminal accessed at 6 a.m. under his administrator credentials. He highlighted several lines I didn't fully parse but recognized for what they were: digital fingerprints. The same terminal had processed the fraudulent transfer authorizations going back 10 months. Same terminal had opened the joint account in both their names. Same terminal had methodically erased the transaction history each time Derek initiated a support payment. Conrad Ashby hadn't merely broken banking regulations. He'd engineered a financial extraction system with the cold precision of industrial machinery. Total documented theft, Wendell said, drawing all the stacks together into a single damning column. $70,500. The number sat between us like something solid. $70,500 taken over 10 months while I'd been living on community food bank donations and cutting pills in half. But that isn't the final figure, Wendell added, and his face grew more serious. I haven't finished auditing every month. There are cash advances, ATM withdrawals I'm still tracing that don't fit normal patterns. The systematic nature of this, Gerald, this wasn't an opportunistic theft. This was a coordinated operation from the start. They planned it, I said, from the beginning. The timeline points to them opening the joint account within weeks of Derek establishing your support payments. They didn't stumble into an opportunity. They manufactured one, built the infrastructure around it, and ran it with criminal precision. Wendell's words confirmed what I'd already been circling but hadn't let myself accept. This wasn't Celeste making a desperate decision and sliding deeper in. This was Celeste and Conrad constructing a system designed from the ground up to drain me quietly, using bank authority and GPS surveillance to cover every angle. We have sufficient grounds for criminal charges, Wendell said. Fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, abuse of fiduciary authority. Conrad loses his banking license and does prison time. Celeste faces elder financial abuse charges stacked on top of standard fraud. But, I said, because I could hear the unspoken word already sitting in the room. Wendell reached into his briefcase one final time, his hand pausing before drawing out a single sheet. He set it on the table with the measured care of someone handling something irreversible. Gerald, there's something else. Something that moves this beyond theft into an entirely different category. I looked down at the page between us. Insurance policy beneficiary change authorization, my name at the top, Celeste's name at the bottom, my life insurance policy. When was this filed? I asked, though some part of me already didn't want the answer. Wendell's expression got there before his words did. 6 months ago. The form Wendell had placed on the nicked oak kitchen table was standard in every respect: date, signature, block beneficiary line. Dated 6 months ago, my signature at the bottom. One name in the beneficiary field, Celeste Colton. 6 months ago, Wendell repeated, his voice even and deliberate. Celeste changed the beneficiary on your life insurance policy from Derek to herself. I lifted the form with hands that had gone numb. The policy number was familiar. I'd carried that same coverage since Lorraine's death 3 years ago, meant to carry me through my remaining years and leave something for Derek when I was gone. The coverage amount was printed in bold at the top. $500,000. $500,000. That was what I was worth to her. Dead. The authorization went through Conrad's bank. Wendell continued, pulling out the supporting paperwork. Same forged signature method they used on the financial transfers. Look at the processing stamp. First Heritage Community Bank. Conrad Ashby's authorization code marked for expedited processing. I studied the signature at the foot of the form. Convincing enough for a quick review, but my actual signature carries a slight hook on the trailing E that this one was missing. 35 years of signing off on engineering documents had given me a distinctive hand. This wasn't it. They've been planning this for at least 6 months, Wendell said. Likely longer. This is dated December 15th last year. December 15th. The date landed with unexpected force. Celeste had come by that afternoon carrying Christmas cookies. She said she'd baked herself. I'd found the bakery box in the trash later. She'd been unusually talkative that day, circling back to questions about my health, my insurance, whether everything was properly arranged for Derek's benefit. I'd taken it for genuine concern. She'd been running reconnaissance. The timeline tells the whole story, Wendell said, lining the documents up in sequence. December beneficiary change, February support payment theft begins, March GPS tracker installed on your phone. Everything was deliberate. He paused. Gerald, she didn't steal some money and then opportunistically think about the insurance. She changed the insurance first. Then she built the tracking apparatus and started funding herself while she waited. Conrad was in it from day one, I said. The understanding settled with the quiet finality of ice forming across still water. This wasn't Celeste acting alone and bringing him in later. They planned it together from the start. The joint account for the stolen funds was opened in January. Wendell confirmed this, showing me yet another document. 1 month after the beneficiary change, they had established their financial partnership before a single dollar had been taken. Someone had put a price on my life. $500,000. And they were prepared to wait. The complete picture assembled itself in my mind with the methodical logic of an engineering schematic. Celeste changes the insurance beneficiary in December, making herself the recipient of $500,000. Once I was gone, she partners with Conrad Ashby, a bank manager with the technical reach to facilitate fraud and bury evidence. They open a joint account in January. In February, the theft begins not as the primary objective, but as supplementary income while they waited. The GPS tracking in March wasn't simply about monitoring my movements to avoid detection. It was about monitoring my health, my routines, my weaknesses, knowing where I went, who I saw, how mobile. I was calculating how long they'd need to be patient. The $70,000 wasn't the target, Gerald, Wendell said quietly. It was pocket money while they waited for the insurance. She wasn't stealing from me, I said, the words landing flat and cold. She was waiting for me to die. Wendell gave a slow nod, his face grim. Every support payment she'd intercepted, every luxury charge run up on Derek's corporate card, it was spending money. Operating expenses for a conspiracy. The real payday had always been the insurance. Every spa treatment she'd enjoyed while I rationed pills, every hotel stay she'd billed while I chose between heat and groceries. Every piece of designer clothing she'd bought while I was surviving on community food bank donations. She'd been celebrating early, spending my son's money, enjoying herself while counting down to my death. The only question was whether she'd let nature handle it or decide to give it a push. How long do you wait for a 60-year-old man with arthritis to die naturally before you decide to help the process along? That phone call I'd caught on my camera footage suddenly carried a different weight entirely. Ryland, I'm dealing with it. Give me 3 more weeks, I promise. I'm working on the insurance angle now. She owed someone money, someone dangerous, someone who'd handed her a deadline. And the insurance angle wasn't about filing a fraudulent claim, it was about accelerating my end to collect the payout. 3 weeks. That was how long I had before Celeste's debt to Ryland ran out and desperation crossed the line from waiting to something far more deliberate. Wendell, I said slowly, what happens when a life insurance beneficiary is found guilty of murdering the policyholder? The policy is voided, Wendell answered without hesitation. The beneficiary receives nothing. It reverts to the estate or the original beneficiary, in this case, Derek. It's called the Slayer Rule. You can't profit from killing someone and collecting their insurance. So if I died of natural causes in the next 3 weeks, Celeste collected $500,000. But if it was proven she murdered me, she got nothing. Correct. Which was exactly why her plan required my death to look natural. Old age, heart failure, complications from arthritis, something that wouldn't raise a flag. I thought about my medications carefully rationed and sitting in my bathroom cabinet, thought about the water I drank every day, thought about Celeste's access to my house, the key she'd used to let herself in at 2 a.m. while I slept. How simple would it be to tamper with an old man's medication, to add something to his water, to engineer circumstances that looked like natural decline while actually being a carefully administered death? I looked at Wendell, then at the insurance document, then at the 11 pages of timeline documentation I'd built that first night. Celeste had been planning my death for 6 months. She'd stolen my money, tracked my movements, pulled a bank manager into her conspiracy. She'd forged my signature and legally positioned herself to profit when I was gone. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd assumed the old man with bad knees and rationed medication was too broken to push back. She'd looked at arthritis and gray hair and concluded she was dealing with someone helpless. She'd never once considered that 35 years of engineering had taught me how to build systems that kept working even when I couldn't. And she was about to find out exactly how wrong that was. After Wendell left, I sat alone at my nicked oak kitchen table and did what I'd done for 35 years. When a complex problem landed in front of me, I reduced it to a system. Celeste had spent 6 months engineering my murder. She'd forged my signature, stolen my money, tracked my movements, and positioned herself to collect $500,000 the moment I died. She'd recruited Conrad Ashby, turned a bank manager's authority into a weapon, and built a criminal structure designed to look legitimate until it was too late. But every system had vulnerabilities. I'd spent 3 decades finding them. I pulled out my legal notebook and opened to a clean page, the lined paper as familiar to me as engineering graph paper. At the top I wrote the Derek problem, because that's what this truly was. Not Celeste's crimes. Those were documented, provable, prosecutable. The problem was my son. Derek loved his wife. He'd been with her 5 years, married for 3. He trusted her completely reflexively through the lens of a man who needed his marriage to hold together. If I called him tomorrow and told him his wife was trying to kill me, he'd think grief and arthritis had finally fractured my mind. If I laid Wendell's documents in front of him, he'd find reasons to question every one of them. Forged evidence, misread transactions, his father's paranoia drawing patterns out of coincidence. No. Phone calls and paperwork wouldn't reach Derek. The moment Celeste offered a counter-explanation, he'd rationalize everything away. He needed to watch her lies come apart in real time. He needed to see her account buckle under the weight of its own contradictions. He needed to be in the room when she could no longer hold the story together. When the practiced smile slipped and something uglier showed beneath it, I wrote under the heading, "Dinner trap necessary." Not for Celeste. For Derek. The trap wasn't designed to catch Celeste. She was already caught, documented in Wendell's files and my camera footage. The trap was to cut through Derek's blind trust before that trust put him in danger, or worse, before it led him to dismiss the very evidence that might save us both. I could spread every document Wendell brought across Derek's kitchen table, and he'd find a reason to doubt each one. But watching his wife's story collapse at his own dinner table, seeing her contradict herself when pressed on specific dates and amounts, listening to her scramble for explanations that refused to add up that he couldn't rationalize away, I moved to a new section. After the trap, because the dinner would only be the opening move. Celeste would be cornered, exposed in front of Derek. She'd panic. And panicked people do one of two things: they confess and beg for forgiveness, or they double down and try to bury the evidence. I was counting on confession. Celeste was calculated, not reckless. Once caught cold in a lie at dinner, she'd shift tactics, admit to some theft, maybe the support payments, maybe the corporate card, but frame it as desperation. Temporary. She'd meant to pay it back. Tears, apologies, promises to make things right. Derek, still reeling from watching her lie at his own table, would want to believe in redemption. He'd want to think the marriage could be pulled back from the edge. He'd want forgiveness to be an option. And I would give it to him not out of mercy, but out of strategy. I wasn't the victim any longer. I was the engineer designing the system, and this system had only one output: justice. I wrote Phase 2 tactical forgiveness. She'd expect rage, confrontation, immediate consequences. Instead, I'd give her the opposite: understanding, patience, a path to make amends. She'd leave that dinner convinced she'd outmaneuvered the old man one more time, convinced that tears and apologies had bought her room to breathe. What she wouldn't know was that every day she spent feeling safe would be another day my cameras were building the case. Every visit she made to my house, every conversation she had in my living room, every phone call she took, believing I was too trusting to notice all of it, recorded, time-stamped, backed up to Wendell's cloud server. Forgiveness was patience, and patience was a weapon. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Long enough for the cameras to catch her confidence returning. Long enough for her guard to drop. Long enough for Conrad to visit, for Ryland to call again, for the full criminal conspiracy to document itself in high-definition video. By the time I handed the evidence package to law enforcement, it wouldn't be my word against hers. It would be hundreds of hours of footage showing exactly who Celeste Colton really was when she thought no one was watching. Celeste thought she was hunting a dying old man. She hadn't realized she'd walked into a trap that had been quietly closing around her for 5 days. I opened to a fresh page and wrote in capital letters at the top, "The plan." Below it, laid out like an engineering specification. Step 1, dinner trap. Sunday, June 22nd. Expose Celeste using the date contradiction, the 12th versus the 18th. She claimed to have delivered money on the 12th, but Derek's transfers had gone out on the 18th. Put her in a position where she has to pick between keeping the lie alive or breaking down and admitting it. Derek is there to see every second. Step 2, tactical forgiveness. Offer grace openly. Take the apology. Hand her 2 to 3 weeks to set things right. Surveillance holds. Everything gets documented. An airtight case gets built. Step 3, evidence delivery. Once the cameras have gathered sufficient additional proof, the complete package goes to law enforcement. Financial fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, insurance, fraud, attempted murder. Hand it off and let the system do the rest. Above those 3 steps, I printed in larger block letters: forgiveness is a tactic, not a weakness. Beneath them, evidence, not emotion. Lorraine had a saying, "I planned everything twice. Once wasn't enough." Sitting there that night, I was thankful she'd drilled that into me, because there was no margin for error here. One shot, no rehearsal. I went back over the 3 steps the way I used to audit mechanical tolerances before a system went live, hunting for the point of failure. Step 1 only worked if Derek was seated at that table when the confrontation happened. Step 2 only held if Celeste took the forgiveness and slipped back into her routines. Step 3 only landed if the documentation was dense enough that no defense lawyer could find daylight in it. A chain, each link forged from the one before, each one built to hold permanently. Celeste had put 6 months into engineering my end. I was going to spend 2 weeks engineering her exposure. I shut the notebook and studied what I'd written, clean, even letters, the handwriting of someone trained to label technical drawings. The dinner was 48 hours out. Sunday evening. I had that window to put together the most consequential meal of my life. The menu was Derek's childhood comfort food cooked on Lorraine's cards, Wendell's evidence files resting within arm's reach of my chair. Nothing about the table would feel like a trap. Everything about it would work like one, because this dinner was either going to pull my son back from the edge or strip away the marriage he thought he had. Maybe both. There was no road back from what I was about to do. Sunday morning, I reached into the back of the kitchen cabinet and brought out Lorraine's old recipe box. 3 years since she'd touched it, but her handwriting was still perfectly legible on those index cards, neat and unhurried as ever. I opened the first card and got to work turning memory into method. 48 hours of preparation had gone into reaching this point. Camera angles verified. Wendell's folder sorted into the sequence I'd present it. What remained now was the part that required the most precision of all, making the room feel like home, so that what I was about to reveal would land with the full weight of betrayal rather than the cold impact of accusation. I started with beef brisket. Lorraine's recipe card was dark with grease from years of Sunday use. Her handwriting moved through the steps the way a good specification does, clear, purposeful, nothing wasted. Sear the meat first. Give it time. Let the vegetables cook down until they practically disappear into the broth. Every Sunday of Derek's childhood, that smell had been spreading through the house before noon, and no matter where he'd ended up that morning, it always brought him back. My hands gave me trouble with the knife. The arthritis has its say in everything now, but the decades of standing beside Lorraine in that same kitchen have left something behind that doesn't live in the joints. The blade found its way. When the meat went into the pan, the sound it made was a sound I recognized in my chest, the sound of a real Sunday. Lorraine used to say beef brisket could gentle anybody's mood. What I needed tonight was something that would drop one person's guard. Buttermilk biscuits came next. Derek had specifically asked for them, had asked for them at every birthday from 6 to 18, never tired of saying nobody made them like his mother. The method was straightforward enough. Buttermilk honey, a cast iron skillet brought up past smoking before the batter went in. What came out was something that went beyond food. Crust that shattered soft interior butter, vanishing into every open surface the moment it touched. Mixing the batter by hand, I kept seeing Derek at 8, at 16, the friends he dragged through the door in high school just for the biscuits. At 25, standing in this kitchen telling Lorraine no one on earth cooked like her. He hadn't been wrong. The aromas that filled the kitchen were ones this house hadn't known since Lorraine died, roasting meat, baking bread, the specific warmth that only settles in a room after hours of real cooking. Or in this case, after hours of cooking a trap designed to feel like love. Nothing welcomes someone in like the smell of a meal made from memory. Blackberry pie went into the oven at 3 o'clock. It had been Lorraine's showpiece, 3 consecutive wins at the Community Food Bank Bake-Off, and she'd written the recipe in her best hand, even added a note at the bottom, Gerald's favorite, extra cinnamon. By 4 o'clock, the whole house carried it, that layered sweetness of everything Derek associated with being home and safe and welcome. I moved into the dining room. Lorraine's anniversary china came down from the hutch for the first time since she'd been gone 3 years. It had sat untouched. White porcelain, fine gold at the rim, a 40th anniversary gift delivered just 2 months before cancer ended everything. 5 times maybe we'd actually used it. We were always saving it for the right occasion, and the right occasions turned out to be rarer than we'd planned for. Lorraine always held that the dining room was the room where family stayed family. Tonight it was where I would surgically remove one person from mine. 3 settings placed with the exactness I'd once used, laying out a circuit schematic. Me at the head. Derek to my right where he'd sat since he was old enough for a chair. Celeste to my left, Lorraine's seat. That wasn't random. With Derek directly across from me, he'd catch everything on my face during the confrontation. With Celeste on my left, I could reach the sideboard without breaking eye contact with her for a single second. Napkins folded the way Lorraine showed me years ago. A simple triangle. Unfussy correct. The wedding candlestick's silver gone, slightly dull polish, only doing so much. I lit at 5 o'clock and let them settle the wax, warming to the kind of steady glow Lorraine always wanted at that table. Looking at it, you'd see a family dinner. A welcome. You would not see what it actually was. Lorraine and I had last sat at this table on our anniversary, 2 months before the end. She'd held my hand in the candlelight between courses, and she'd smiled. Tonight I would use the same table, the same light to dismantle what my son thought his life was. She'd have understood. At 5:15, I turned to the final piece. Wendell's evidence folder went into the sideboard drawer exactly 3 feet to my left. The contents, the beneficiary change document statements tracing the joint account, corporate card receipts, cataloging Celeste's luxury spending, IP access logs pulled from Conrad Ashby's terminal. Ordered for presentation. Every page flagged. I ran through the motion once, turn left, open the drawer, lift the folder, lay it flat on the table in front of me. 6 seconds. The smoothness of a sequence I'd automated 30 years ago on a factory floor. The dinner table had become the stage. The cameras were the record. The evidence was what I'd load and fire, and the engineer behind all of it had spent a full week checking that nothing would misfire. One last camera pass. Kitchen clean sightline to the table, microphone sensitivity sufficient for low voices. Living room wide coverage of the entrance and the sofa grouping. Hallway redundant audio for anything that developed near the door. Every feed running live to Wendell's cloud server. If tonight broke sideways, if Celeste's back was against a wall and something in her shifted, if Ryland's 3-week deadline made tonight the night she stopped waiting, at least everything would be preserved. 35 years in engineering, the systems that matter most are invisible until the moment they're needed. At 5:45, I dressed. The gray flannel shirt, the one I'd put on for Lorraine's funeral 3 years ago, been in the closet ever since, pressed and ready, waiting for something that warranted it. Tonight warranted it. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, 60 years old, hair thinning, hands unsteady enough on the buttons that I had to work slowly. But my eyes held, clear and exact, calibrated the way they'd always been when I was tracking a problem that mattered. Celeste had read this old man as someone already beaten. She'd been wrong about that from the start. Back in the dining room, I took a final accounting. Beef brisket on Lorraine's serving platter, buttermilk biscuits in the cast iron golden across the top, blackberry pie resting on the counter, cinnamon steam still threading up from the crust, anniversary china catching the candlelight, Wendell's folder 3 feet from my right hand, all of it placed, all of it calculated, all of it loaded for maximum effect. 6 o'clock. Derek had said 6. At 5:58, the sound of his black Audi reached me before I saw headlights. Through the dining room window, I watched my son come around to Celeste's door, watched her step out and straighten her dress, checked the side mirror before she moved toward the house. She carried herself like a woman arriving for dinner with family. Nothing in her walk suggested she had any idea what was waiting past the door. 2 minutes and the trap would close. In 35 years of building systems, I'd never constructed one as finely tuned as what I was about to trigger at that table, sprung quietly mid-meal with a casual mention of returning that month's support payment. The bell rang at exactly 6 p.m. I pulled the door open. Derek was grinning, Celeste at his side under his arm, both dressed like they were coming to a party, not a reckoning. "Dad, the house smells incredible," Derek said, and wrapped his arms around me. "Is that Mom's beef brisket and buttermilk biscuits?" "That's right," I told him, stepping back to wave them in. "Time I cooked something proper." Celeste leaned in and kissed my cheek. Her perfume was expensive and a touch too heavy. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble, Dad." I'd gone to precisely the right amount of trouble. Dinner opened exactly as I'd designed it. Warm, unhurried defenses softened by familiar food and the quiet pull of candlelight. Derek praised the beef brisket, said it tasted exactly like Lorraine's. Celeste complimented the anniversary china, asked whether I'd brought it out just for them. I poured sweet tea into the crystal glasses and watched them settle into the evening. 20 minutes of easy conversation. Derek's latest contracts in Atlanta, Celeste's book club. My arthritis medication, Celeste asked with practiced concern whether I was keeping up with it. I said yes and watched her face for any tell, finding only that polished daughter-in-law smile. Then midway through the meal, I released the trap. "Actually, I've kept my spending low this month," I said in an offhand tone, working my knife through the beef brisket. "Been relying on the community food bank. No need to bother with the monthly transfer. I can just send it back and save you the trip." The response came before she could think. "No, Dad. I have to bring the money. Derek finalized it on the 18th. Celeste said immediately, already reaching for the buttermilk biscuits. "It's all right, She stopped mid-sentence. Her hand hung in the air over the basket. Derek's fork struck the rim of his plate with a sharp clink. "The 18th, Derek said, his voice shifting into something slower, harder. "Celeste, I never mentioned payroll closing on the 18th. That's internal company information." The candlelight found Celeste's face right at that moment. The practiced smile wobbled, then tried to pull itself back together. "You must have told me at some point, honey. I probably just..." I've never discussed our payroll schedule with you. Derek set his fork down with the deliberate care of a man choosing his next words. That's confidential. The 18th is when we close out all monthly transfers. How do you know that? I stood and crossed to the sideboard exactly 3 feet to my left, exactly where I'd measured it. The drawer came open cleanly. Wendell's folder rose out of it like a piece of evidence handed across a courtroom, because she's been intercepting those transfers for 10 months. I said, coming back to the table and spreading the documents across Lorraine's white tablecloth, all of them. The first sheet transfer authorizations carrying my forged signature routed into the joint account held by Celeste Colton and Conrad Ashby. The second, corporate card statements, every luxury charge itemized Conrad's authorizations visible on every fraudulent line. The third, GPS tracking records 3 months of location data pulled from my phone and sent to an unknown number. The fourth, the insurance beneficiary changed my supposed signature again, $500,000 redirected to Celeste 6 months ago. Derek lifted each page with unsteady hands, his color draining in the candlelight. I watched him read, watched the numbers register, watched 30 seconds of quiet reading undo 3 years of marriage. In 35 years of engineering, I built systems rated to absorb enormous stress. In those 30 seconds, I watched my son's trust in his wife give way completely. 42,000 in fraudulent transfers, I said quietly. 28,000 charged to your corporate card. And this, I slid the insurance document forward, the policy where your wife named herself beneficiary 6 months ago. Derek looked up from the papers and found Celeste's face across the table. Tell me this isn't what it looks like, he said, his voice fracturing on the last word. Tell me you weren't taking money meant for my father while he was getting food from the community food bank. Celeste's composure went the way wet paper does. Real tears this time, not the kind she'd rehearsed. I can explain, she whispered. Please, Derek, just let me explain everything. Then explain, I said. The account came out in broken pieces, interrupted by quiet sobs. Bad investments, credit card debt, someone named Ryland, she left it at just the name, no details about what she owed him or how bad it had gotten. Desperation that compounded into theft, Conrad Ashby offering a way in, handing over the banking access she needed. The GPS tracker installed to make sure I wouldn't stumble onto the fraud before she'd had time to reverse it. It was a confessional with the sharp edges filed off, guilt admitted just far enough to seem honest culpability cushioned at every turn. I'd heard the same architecture of excuse from contractors who'd cut corners on factory equipment, always blaming circumstance rather than the decision to cut. But Derek wasn't listening to a structural analysis. He was listening to his wife admit she'd been stealing from his father. The gap between complicated and criminal hadn't landed in him yet. I can transfer $12,000 tonight, Celeste said, her phone already in her trembling hands. First installment. I'll have everything back to you within 6 months, I swear. Please, Derek, please just give me the chance to make this right. Derek looked at me, suspended between the father sitting across from him and the wife falling apart beside him. The love was still there in his eyes when they moved to her face, that particular inability to see clearly when you need your marriage to survive more than you need the truth. This was the hinge the entire plan rested on. Everyone deserves a second chance, I said, measuring each word. But Celeste, if you let us down again, there won't be another dinner like this one. There will only be lawyers and a police report. She completed the $12,000 transfer before the tears had finished. The confirmation tone sounded once her phone screen glowing in the candlelight. Derek helped her to her feet. At the door, she pulled me into an embrace, whispered apologies into my shoulder, the words smelling somehow of guilt and expensive perfume. I stayed at the window and watched their taillights thin out and disappear. Behind me, the dining room still held the scattered evidence and the half-eaten plates. The cameras had caught everything, every word, every tear, every carefully measured admission. Celeste believed she had navigated her way out of ruin. She thought the forgiveness meant she was safe. What she hadn't accounted for was that I'd handed her exactly enough freedom to reveal what she was actually willing to do next. 3 days later, she came to my door with homemade soup and a smile. 3 days after I extended that forgiveness, Celeste appeared on my porch carrying a covered pot of homemade chicken soup, wearing the expression of someone who was certain she'd gotten away with it, not yet understanding she was about to do something she hadn't done yet. She had on yoga pants and a cardigan. Late June, humid enough that the pot steamed the moment she stepped outside. Hair pulled back, no designer pieces, no jewelry worth noting. She looked altogether like a daughter-in-law who meant to make good. I know words won't fix what I did, she said when I opened the door. So I'm going to show you and Derek through what I do instead. Starting with this. You shouldn't be cooking at your age, not with your arthritis. The soup smelled right. Homemade stock vegetables, herbs I couldn't quite place. She pressed to come inside and heat it herself. Pressed to ladle it into one of Lorraine's old bowls. Pressed to stay until she'd watch me eat it while it was still hot. While the pot warmed on the stove, she spotted the water filter on the counter. "Dad, this filter is ancient," she said, turning it over in her hands. "I brought a new one. Let me swap it out. It'll only take a minute." I stood and watched as she pulled the old unit free and fitted the replacement she'd brought in her bag. Her hands moved with a practiced ease that had nothing hesitant about it. She filled the reservoir, ran water through twice to clear the system, then drew me a glass and held it out with a smile. "There," she said. "Clean water, hot soup, and my word that I'll do better. Twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. No more letting you get by on community food bank handouts." That night, the first symptoms arrived. Mild nausea around 9 p.m. Nothing that demanded attention, just enough to register. A dull headache that parked itself behind my eyes and wouldn't move on. I put it down to stress, to the accumulated weight of the past 2 weeks. But when Celeste came back on Friday with beef stew and the same bright smile, the shape of something became visible. She reheated the food, checked the water filter, asked how I was feeling, that same practiced attentiveness. That night, the nausea bit harder, the headache sharpened. I opened my legal notebook to a clean page and started a log. June 25th, 8:15 p.m. Nausea severity, 6 out of 10. Celeste visited, replaced water filter. June 26th, 9:30 p.m. Nausea increased to 7 out of 10. Headache 5 out of 10. Water from new filter consumed. June 29th, 7:45 p.m. Nausea 7 out of 10. Headache 6 out of 10. Unusual fatigue. Celeste visited today, brought stew. Every Tuesday and Friday, Celeste brought something into my kitchen that I was increasingly certain wasn't food, and every Tuesday and Friday I let her. On the fourth visit, I settled onto the living room couch and let my eyes close. The bedroom camera had a clear line into the kitchen. I reviewed the footage later that night, the screen throwing blue light across the room, and watched her do what I'd already started to suspect. She moved to the water filter with her back toward where I lay and spent close to 2 minutes working at it, too far from that angle for me to read the details. The camera had the angle I didn't. When I pulled up the footage, I could see her introduce something into the reservoir. A measured amount handled with care, the lid replaced, and then the counter wiped down with a paper towel she'd brought herself and took away with her. She didn't check on me before she left. No farewell. Just the quiet pull of the door latch and she was gone. I added the entry to the log. July 2nd, camera timestamp, 2:47 p.m. Celeste tampered with the water filter. Deliberate. Practiced. Whatever she introduced, she carried it in and erased every trace on the way out. What I'm about to share changed everything I thought I understood about the people sitting at my table that night. The stakes were higher than I had let myself believe, and what I did next would cost me more than I ever planned to pay. Let me ask you this: if you knew the truth might destroy you before it could save you, would you still go after it? She wasn't here to help me recover. She was engineering my decline slowly, invisibly, in a way that would read to any outside observer as age finally catching up with a sick old man. I was trading my health for evidence, my body for justice. Some engineers build bridges. I was building a case airtight enough to put a murderer behind bars. After Celeste's 5th visit in mid-July, she brought someone I hadn't seen before. "Dad, this is Greta Morrow," Celeste said, gesturing to the young woman at her side. "I've hired her as a private nurse to look in on you twice a week just to keep tabs on how you're holding up while we work through everything. No arguments. It's the bare minimum I can do." Greta Morrow looked exactly as a credentialed health professional should. 30 years old, a kind face, sensible shoes, medical bag over one shoulder. Her handshake was gentle but firm. "Mr. Colton, I'm here to help," she said. "Let me get some vitals down, and we'll set a baseline for your care." She went through the standard work blood pressure, pulse, temperature questions about my daily routine, what I was eating, what I was taking for the arthritis. Then she moved to the water filter. "How many glasses a day would you say you're drinking, Mr. Colton?" she asked, pen ready over her clipboard. "And you're using this filter exclusively, roughly 6 glasses?" I said yes. Told her the filter was new. Celeste had swapped it out a couple of weeks ago. "Good, good," Greta said, stepping over for a closer look. "Hydration matters at your age." She brought out her phone and took several photographs of the filter from multiple angles. Not the kind of documentation you'd find in any medical record. The kind you'd take to confirm a method was producing results. "Any unusual symptoms?" she asked, still focused on the unit. "Nausea, headaches, fatigue." "Some," I admitted. But I put it down to stress. Greta nodded along. Her face agreed. Her eyes told a different story entirely. She was cataloging my decline, measuring it against whatever schedule Celeste had set. She wasn't there to look after me. She was there to track how fast I was going. After they left, I sat at the nicked oak kitchen table and added Greta's name to my notebook. Another participant, another person who'd signed on to help Celeste commit murder in exchange for a cut of the insurance money. That evening, I noticed the Bible on my nightstand, the one Celeste had given me 2 weeks earlier, calling it a spiritual comfort for hard times. I'd barely touched it. Bibles had been part of the furniture of grief on that nightstand since Lorraine died. This one had settled in perfectly, which was probably the idea. But something about Greta's visit, the careful photographs, the targeted questions, made me reach for it. When I picked the Bible up, something slipped out from between the pages and fell to the floor. A folded piece of paper, thin, the edges going yellow. I opened it. The handwriting wasn't scripture. It was a single handwritten note: July 8th, 3 drops, mild nausea/headache, onset 6 hours. But when I opened the Bible itself, what I found was far worse. I smoothed out the loose page first, my hands already unsteady. The handwriting was unmistakably Celeste's, that careful cursive I recognized from birthday cards and thank you notes. These words, though, were neither grateful nor celebratory. July 8th, 3 drops, mild nausea/headache, onset. 6 hours post-dose. Subject maintains normal routine. Subject. She was calling me a subject as though I weren't her father-in-law sitting across from her at Sunday dinner, but a variable in an equation she was methodically solving. My arthritic fingers were clumsy as I lifted the Bible from the nightstand. It was heavier than it should have been, the weight sitting wrong. 35 years of calibrating mechanical systems had given me a feel for when something carries more than it ought to. I opened it with care. Tucked between Psalms and Proverbs, nestled into the natural fold of the spine, was a small, spiral-bound notebook, 20 pages or so, everyone filled with that same precise handwriting. This wasn't one loose sheet that had slipped out. This was an entire murder diary. I carried the notebook to my bed and settled under the lamp, angling myself so the bedroom camera would record me reading without capturing the pages themselves. Then I started from the first entry. June 26th, first addition to filter. No visible reaction within 12 hours. Continue schedule. June 29th, second edition. No change in routine. Subject consumed approximately 6 glasses of filtered water. Increase next time. July 1st, third edition. Nausea observed 6 hours later. Appetite slightly reduced. Continue. July 3rd, fourth edition. Nausea recurring. Subject attributes symptoms to age and stress. Misdirection working. July 5th, fifth edition. Estimated 3-pound weight loss. Fatigue mentioned to Greta. Monitoring effective. July 8th, sixth edition. Increased amount. Nausea moderate. Subject ate full breakfast despite discomfort, more resilient than expected. July 10th, seventh edition. Estimated 8-pound total weight loss. Skin pale, energy notably lower. Medical intervention likely within 2 to 3 weeks. Timeline on track. Insurance claim timeline acceptable. She had concealed her murder log inside a Bible. The Book of Faith. The Book of Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Written on the same pages that covered her plan to do exactly that. I read every entry twice, my hands steadier now that the shock had burned off into cold clarity. 23 entries across 3 weeks, each one recording another step toward my death. Each one treating my declining health the way an engineer treats data points on a graph. The final entry was dated yesterday, July 15th, 8th edition. Subject reports dizziness to Greta. Difficulty on stairs observed. Weakness progressing as expected. Derek remains unaware. Next step, increase amount if current pace continues. Projected timeline 10 to 14 days before hospitalization. 10 to 14 days. That was Celeste's estimate before I'd be sick enough to need a hospital bed. And once I was there, weak, disoriented, dying of what looked like natural causes compounded by old age and poor health, the insurance claim would move without obstruction. $500,000. That was the figure my carefully engineered death had been priced at. I rose and crossed to my workshop knees, complaining with each step, and took down the old film camera from the shelf where it had gathered dust since Lorraine's funeral. No internet connection, No cloud backup, no metadata that could be traced, accessed, or erased from a server somewhere. Film doesn't sync to anything. Film carries no digital fingerprint. Film is analog evidence in a world that runs on digital and that made it untouchable. I brought it back to the bedroom and set the notebook open under the bedside lamp. Page by page, I photographed Celeste's handwriting. The shutter clicked in the silence of the house. Each frame another piece of what would bury her. 23 pages. 23 documented acts of premeditated attempted murder. 23 images that would make any claim of accident or natural illness impossible to sustain. When I'd finished, I wound the film with care and locked it in the light-tight drawer in my workshop. Then, with the patience I'd developed over decades of installing precision equipment, I returned the notebook to exactly the position I'd found it. Spiral binding aligned with the spine-fold pages, resting between Psalms and Proverbs. The loose sheet, the one that had fallen and given everything away, tucked back into place as a bookmark. The Bible went back onto the nightstand at the same angle Celeste had left it, the same distance from the lamp, the same relation to my reading glasses. She had hidden her murder log inside a Bible. Whether that was irony or some kind of confession, I couldn't say, but she could not know I'd been in it. She had to believe herself safe enough to keep using it, to keep adding entries, to keep building her own prosecution file without realizing it. I looked at the Bible sitting quiet on the nightstand at the camera concealed in the bedroom wall at the window where Dawn would be arriving in a few hours. Celeste thought she was 2 to 3 weeks from a clean kill and $500,000. What she didn't know was that I'd just photographed her confession. I developed the film the following morning using the darkroom equipment I'd set up 30 years ago. The same enlarger, the same developer trays I'd used for Lorraine's photography work. The images came up slowly in the bath, page after page of Celeste's handwriting, every word crisp and legible. I was hanging the prints on the line to dry when the walkie-talkie on the workshop bench crackled to life. "Gerald," Wendell's voice clipped tight. "We have a problem. She's accelerating the timeline." I picked up the walkie-talkie, my hands still carrying the chemical smell of the darkroom, and pressed transmit. "Wendell, I'm here. What's happening?" A beat of static, then his voice came back hard and quick. "Conrad just filed withdrawal authorizations, $48,300 across 3 accounts. Everything liquidates in 5 days." I looked at the film prints still hanging above me, dripping quietly in the dark. Celeste's murder diary, captured on film in her own handwriting, was irrefutable proof that she'd been systematically poisoning me. But proof was worthless if she vanished before I could deploy it. "They're running," I said. "That's not the worst part." Wendell's voice dropped in the way it did when he was about to say something that would shift everything. "I found out who Ryland is." I lowered myself onto my workshop stool, knees protesting. The nausea that had shadowed me for 3 weeks rolled through again, a reminder that every conversation, every decision, every calculated move was happening while poison continued to build in my system. "Tell me," I said. "Ryland Decker, 45 years old, runs what he calls an investment brokerage, but it's underground lending with brutal collection methods. I pulled public records. Celeste signed a promissory note 4 months ago. $80,000. 80,000. The number unlocked things. The desperation in her voice on that 2 a.m. phone call. The calculated choice to steal from family. The escalation from theft to murder. "When does the note come due?" I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer wouldn't be good. 60-day repayment deadline from signing, Wendell said. The note was dated May 15th. Gerald. That means it expired July 14th. I looked at the calendar on my workshop wall. July 16th. The deadline had already passed. "She's 2 days late," I said quietly, "which means Ryland's already moved to enforcement. That's why she's liquidating now. The $48,000 won't cover the 80 she owes, but it might buy enough time to disappear before he escalates." 2 weeks. She'd had 2 weeks to either kill me or run, and I'd spent 3 weeks allowing her to poison me in order to collect evidence. The strategic patience I'd been so careful about, the methodical documentation, the steady accumulation, had all depended on me holding the timeline, but I'd never held it. Celeste's clock had been running since May, driven by a debt and a deadline I hadn't known was there. "The insurance," I said, working through it aloud. "She needs the $500,000 to settle with Ryland and still come out with something, but the poisoning isn't moving fast enough." "Exactly," Wendell confirmed. "Her diary has her estimating 2 to 3 weeks before you'd need hospitalization, but Ryland's deadline is already gone. She's out of time." The implications settled through me like cold water. Celeste had been dosing me with precision, tracking my decline like a controlled experiment, calibrating toward a death that would pass as natural. But precision required patience, and patience was the one thing she no longer had. So she has two choices, I said, thinking it through as I spoke. Run with the 48,000 and hope Ryland doesn't track her down, or accelerate. Accelerate? Wendell echoed, his voice flat and grim. If she abandons the careful approach, if desperation makes her throw out the measured amounts, how quickly could this become something irreversible? I asked, not really expecting an answer. Wendell's silence told me he'd already been sitting with that question. I looked down at my hands in the workshop's dim light. They were shaking steadily now, a fine, constant tremor I couldn't suppress. My skin had taken on a yellowish cast jaundice beginning to show as my liver strained under the accumulated load. The weight loss had left my clothes hollow on my frame, my belt 2 notches tighter than it used to go. 3 weeks of deliberate endurance, 3 weeks of trading my body for evidence, 3 weeks of letting Celeste poison me because I believed I was running the system I'd designed. But I'd miscalculated one critical variable. Her deadline wasn't one I had set. The withdrawal completes in 5 days, Wendell said. If she's planning to run, that's when it happens. But if she decides to accelerate instead, she'll move before then, before her next scheduled visit, before you have time to notice the dosage changed. Celeste's next scheduled visit was tomorrow, Friday. She'd bring soup or a casserole heated on my stove, check the water filter with that rehearsed concern. And if she'd decided acceleration was her only path out, tomorrow's dose wouldn't be the careful 3 or 4 drops her diary recorded. It would be enough to make sure I didn't see the following week. Gerald, Wendell said quietly through the static, you need to stop drinking the filtered water right now. Stop eating anything she brings. Stop. I know what I need to do, I said, but did I? The original plan had been clean. Tactical forgiveness. Extended surveillance. Weeks of camera footage compiling itself. An airtight case handed to authorities once Celeste's own handwriting proved premeditated murder beyond any conceivable doubt. That plan needed time. It needed me to stay alive. It needed me functional enough to be the one who made the handoff. None of those conditions held anymore. I'd been the engineer setting the trap, controlling the pace, choosing the moment. But somewhere in the past 72 hours, while I was congratulating myself on photographing her murder diary, the positions had flipped. I was the prey now, and the predator had just recognized she was out of runway. 2 weeks wasn't enough to finish building a perfect case, but it might be enough to survive. It had to be. Wendell's voice returned through the static. Gerald, what do you need from me? I looked at the film print still hanging on the line, 23 pages of murder diary. I looked at my reflection in the workshop window, skin going yellow, hands trembling, body failing under weeks of accumulated poison. I looked at the calendar with its circled date, a deadline that had already come and gone. The case I'd been constructing demanded a living witness. It needed me to testify. It needed me to walk into a courtroom and stand across from Celeste with every piece of evidence laid out between us. But what if I didn't survive to testify? What if the plan I actually needed wasn't one that required my survival, but one designed to function even if I went down tomorrow? I need Derek, I said into the walkie-talkie, and I need a contingency that doesn't depend on me being alive when this is over. By the 3rd week after the dinner, my reflection had become someone I barely recognized. Skin yellowing and tight over bone, hands that trembled too badly to hold a coffee cup steady. 10 pounds gone from a frame that had no pounds to spare. I needed Derek to grasp the full picture. I needed medical documentation that would outlast me if it came to that. But first, the counter strategy had to be locked down before the final collapse. Dr. Caldwell, my family physician for 15 years, examined me with practiced efficiency and arrived at a conclusion that was entirely logical and entirely wrong. The arthritis is advancing faster than I'd like, Gerald, he said, reviewing my vitals. Combined with the stress of your family situation, your body is under serious strain. Rest, hydration, reduce your physical activity. Arthritis and stress. The diagnosis accounted for everything without requiring him to suspect murder. I didn't raise the poisoning without toxicology results. Any accusation would sound like paranoid confusion from an old man. I'll rest, I promised, knowing I probably wouldn't be around long enough for rest to make a difference. That afternoon, Derek arrived looking like 3 weeks had aged him 5 years. Wendell, I said, track those accounts. Celeste and Conrad are liquidating everything. The withdrawal finalizes in 3 days. They're running. Derek's face drained of color. Dad, forget the money. Look at yourself. We need to get you to a hospital right now. We will, I said. But first, I need your help with something. I took him to Celeste's closet. Hidden behind the winter coats was a large suitcase already packed. "She's been ready to leave for weeks," I said. "We're going to make sure we can find her when she does." The GPS tracker was smaller than my thumb, untraceable. Together we opened the lining seam with care, worked the device inside, and stitched it closed. "If I collapse before she runs," I said, "you'll still be able to follow where she goes." Derek's hands were unsteady as he worked. "I can't believe I brought her into this family. Dad, I'm so sorry." "You loved her," I said. "That's not a crime. What she chose to do with that love, that's honor." For the first time in 35 years of being his father, my son and I were reading from the same blueprint. I only wished we hadn't needed to get here the way we did. After the suitcase, I walked him through the evidence. I'd prepared a water sample from the filter, sealed in an envelope addressed to Wendell. The film photographs of Celeste's dosage notebook in a second envelope. A handwritten note naming Conrad Ashby and Ryland Decker folded and tucked into my wallet. "If something happens to me," I said, "Wendell gets both envelopes immediately. The wallet stays on me at all times. If I end up in a hospital bed and can't speak, whoever finds me will find those names." Derek was crying by then, doing his best not to show it. "Dad, please, can we just go to the hospital now?" "Tomorrow," I said. "I promise. But tonight I need to make certain everything is in position." There was one final thing. I lifted the lid on the small wooden box sitting on my dresser, the one that had held Lorraine's wedding ring in the 3 years since she passed. I'd worn it for 42 years, then took it off the day I put her in the ground. But tonight felt like I might be joining her soon. "For Lorraine," I said quietly, working it onto my finger, "and for whatever follows." The following afternoon, I felt the collapse arriving. I was crossing from the kitchen toward the bedroom when my legs began to give. Not all at once, gradually, the way a machine loses pressure, vision closing in at the edges, equilibrium deserting me. Maybe 30 seconds of awareness remained, but 30 seconds was sufficient for one last act. I went to my knees in the hallway. Lorraine's ring heavy on my hand. The wooden floor was aged oak worn from decades of use. I pressed the ring stone against the grain and started to scratch. V. The band dragged across the wood. V, then P. 2 letters, 10 seconds. My entire case etched into a hallway floor. Each stroke came slowly, demanding enormous effort as my hands trembled and sight dimmed. But I'd spent 35 years working to exact tolerances. I knew how to leave marks that endure. V plus P, Celeste and Conrad. Even if I never woke, Derek would understand. Evidence, not emotion. The last sensation was cold hardwood against my cheek and the weight of Lorraine's ring on my finger. The symbol was finished. The evidence was secured. I'd designed the system to function even when I couldn't. Derek's voice tore through the dark. "Dad." Dad, hands on my shoulders, rolling me onto my back. Him shouting into his phone, reciting my address, saying unresponsive and emergency and please hurry. Sirens pulling closer. My final coherent thought before everything went black was that the symbol was complete. The tracker was running. The evidence was preserved. The water sample sat in Derek's possession. The film photographs documented Celeste's murder diary. The names in my wallet would point investigators toward Conrad and Ryland. Even if I died in that hallway with Lorraine's ring on my finger, Celeste would not walk free. The system would carry on without me. That's what sound engineering meant. Derek's voice reached me through the fog, distant and desperate. "Stay with me. Please stay with me." I felt hands lifting me. Multiple voices, now professional measured. The ambulance had come, equipment sounds. Radio chatter, someone calling out vitals and numbers I couldn't process. The last thing I registered was Derek's voice fracturing as he said something to the paramedics. Words I couldn't quite catch, but the meaning was clear enough. "My father. Please save my father." Then darkness took everything. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known in that moment, was that 18 hours later I would open my eyes in a hospital bed and the real reckoning would begin. Consciousness returned in pieces. Sirens fading, Derek's voice breaking as he spoke into his phone. Ambulance ceiling tiles sliding past paramedics' hands, locating pulse points I could barely feel. The last clear thing I remembered was finishing those letters in my hallway floor. Lorraine's ring heavy on my finger. Now I was flat on my back, moving fast. Derek's face drifting in and out of focus above me. BP dropping someone announced clinical and flat. 60-year-old male, severe dehydration, altered consciousness. ETA 4 minutes. I tried to speak. Tried to tell them to check for arsenic, check my fingernails, but my throat wouldn't cooperate. Everything felt remote, like watching the scene from behind thick glass. Derek's hand locked around mine, His other hand held the phone pressed to his ear. "Wendell, he collapsed," Derek said, voice unsteady, V and P carved into the floor. He knew Wendell. He knew about all of it. "Send everything to the detective right now." The ambulance was still moving. That meant I was still alive. That meant the system was still working, needle going into my arm. Oxygen mask over my face, voices running through fluids and vitals and possible sepsis. They didn't know yet. Couldn't know yet. But the evidence would tell them what my voice no longer could. I'd built the system to operate even when I was unable to. Derek told me later that the moment he called from the ambulance, Wendell executed the contingency plan immediately from his office 15 miles away. Wendell grabbed his phone and dialed the detective's direct line. "Detective, it's Wendell Pruitt," he said. "Evidence package is uploading now. Attempted murder in progress. Victim is being transported to Macon Regional Medical Center as we speak." I had built a system that worked even when I couldn't. Even when I was dying. Perhaps especially then. In the ambulance, Derek stared at the photo on his phone, the image he'd captured before the paramedics arrived. 2 letters carved into aged oak flooring. V plus P. V for Celeste, P for Conrad. His father had used his last conscious moment to leave evidence. Not a cry for help. Not the wandering of a confused mind. Deliberate, calculated evidence etched with his mother's wedding ring. That's when it struck him. The tactical forgiveness after the dinner. The careful documentation. The way his father had grown visibly sicker over the past month, yet kept insisting on waiting, on gathering more evidence, on being methodical. He'd known for weeks, maybe the entire time since that dinner, that Celeste was poisoning him, and he had allowed it to continue. "Sir, we're pulling in now," one of the paramedics said, as the ambulance lurched to a stop. The emergency bay doors flew open. Orderlies rushed the gurney inside, Derek jogging alongside, still holding his father's hand. Medical codes being called out. Nurses converging the controlled chaos of an emergency room receiving a critical patient. As they wheeled me through those automatic doors past the triage desk and into treatment room 3, I caught fragments of conversation, standard emergency protocol, fluids, blood work, possible causes, dehydration, stress, cardiac event, infection. What they had no way of knowing yet was that this was not random illness or stress or anything natural. This was systematic poisoning, and the proof was written in my fingernails. Derek stood frozen in the waiting area as they took his father behind the curtain. The V plus P photo still glowed on his phone screen. He'd let her poison him. The realization kept arriving in waves, each one heavier than the last. For 4 weeks, his father had allowed Celeste to slowly kill him, just so the cameras could capture sufficient evidence that she could never claim ignorance or accident. Every Tuesday and Friday visit, every meal she'd delivered with that practiced smile, every solicitous question about his health, his father had accepted it all, documented it all, endured it all. The tactical forgiveness after that dinner wasn't mercy. It was strategy. Derek sank into a plastic waiting room chair, hands trembling. "You stubborn, brilliant man," he whispered to the empty hallway. "You traded your life for evidence." His phone buzzed. "Wendell." "It's done," Wendell said when Derek answered. "Everything uploaded. Detective Strickland has it all. She's coordinating with the hospital now. They'll run the right tests." Wendell, he knew. Derek said, his voice cracking. The symbol on the floor. That wasn't confusion. That was deliberate. He knew she was poisoning him, and he let it happen. Silence on the line. "Then your father spent 35 years as an engineer. He built systems. This was just the last one he designed, and it's working exactly as he planned." Derek looked down the hallway toward the treatment room where doctors were working on his father. "Will he survive it?" Derek asked quietly. Wendell's reply came slowly. "I don't know. But even if he doesn't, Celeste won't escape. That's what he built this for." Inside treatment room 3, I felt hands moving with practiced efficiency. IV fluids, blood draws, vital sign checks, voices cataloging symptoms and running through differential diagnoses. Standard protocol for an elderly man who'd collapsed at home. But in 18 hours, when the blood work returned with unusual patterns, someone would order additional testing. A toxicologist would be called in, and they would find exactly what I needed them to find. The arsenic in my blood, the accumulation in my hair follicles, the deposits in my fingernails proving systematic sustained poisoning carried out over weeks, the proof that would turn suspicion into certainty, theory into fact, investigation into prosecution. The woman reviewing my blood work had the kind of eyes that had looked at death before, steady, unflinching, calculating. Dr. Audra Fenwick didn't know I'd been anticipating her arrival for 3 weeks. 18 hours after the ambulance delivered me to Macon Regional Medical Center, I came back to fluorescent lighting and the steady rhythm of monitors. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, every muscle resisting the smallest movement, but my mind was clear enough to recognize the figure standing at the foot of my bed. Dr. Audra Fenwick, 45 years old, chief toxicologist. I had looked into her credentials weeks earlier while planning for this moment. 22 years spent analyzing poisons, gray-streaked hair pulled tight in a bun, eyes that could read death in blood chemistry the way I once read mechanical tolerances. She glanced up from her tablet when she noticed I was conscious. "Mr. Colton," her tone was measured, deliberate. "I'm Dr. Fenwick from toxicology. We're seeing anomalies in your blood work stress markers on several organs that don't fit a cardiac event or sepsis. I need to understand what you may have been exposed to." I'd been waiting for someone to ask me that question since the first Tuesday Celeste showed up at my door with soup. Look at my fingernails. I made a point of not trimming them for 3 weeks. Something shifted in Dr. Fenwick's face. "Nail clipping analysis," she murmured almost to herself. "Arsenic binding to keratin tissue. Textbook forensic toxicology. Rarely ordered unless a physician already suspects something." Her eyes came up to meet mine. "You anticipated exactly what we'd find." First confusion moved across her features, then something colder replaced it. Recognition edged with alarm. "You knew," she said, the words coming out slow. "You understood the whole time that you were being poisoned." "Week 1, I told her. That's when I first noticed it. A metallic edge to the water. Faint, but I'd been tasting water from that line for years. I'm an engineer. 35 years spent tracing the source of failures. My water supply had been compromised, I was certain of it. So why not report it?" Disbelief tightened her voice. "Why not walk into an emergency room?" "I needed proof," I said, "not a hunch. Proof." The cameras had to document her putting the poison in, had to establish method and premeditation. That kind of evidence accumulates slowly. The antiseptic smell around me receded as I returned to that first metallic taste 3 weeks ago, the moment of recognition, the moment I decided to let my own body become the record. Dr. Fenwick set her tablet on the blanket and drew her chair closer, the professional composure on her face starting to give way. "Mr. Colton," she said quietly, "you're telling me you voluntarily sustained a poisoning to generate criminal evidence. You risked your life, maybe spent it for what exactly?" "A guilty verdict." "Certainty," I said. "That's the correction. Without camera documentation, it's one old man's allegation against his daughter-in-law. With it, it's an irrefutable record, dosages, visits, every deliberate move toward my death captured in sharp detail." She held my gaze for several seconds, then reached for her phone. "I'm putting in an emergency toxicology panel," she said, fingers already moving across the screen. "Hair follicles, nail clippings, full heavy metal screen. If the arsenic is there, it's there," I said. "Pull the dosage progression." She built up to it, gradually testing how much my system could absorb. 2 drops first, then 3, then 4. She kept records. Her notebook. Dr. Fenwick repeated the words, hidden in a Bible. She surrendered 23 pages of it to me, every date, every measurement, every symptom she observed. She cataloged my dying the way a researcher logs an experiment. Dr. Fenwick went to place the orders. Half an hour later, she was back. The results were in her hand and the answer was written across her face before she said a word. "The toxicology bears out what you described," she said quietly, angling the tablet toward me. "Heavy metal levels in ranges consistent with ongoing exposure across roughly 21 days. Hair follicle samples trace a pattern that only goes one direction up. Whoever administered this was escalating on a schedule." "My daughter-in-law," I said, "Celeste Colton. Run the kitchen water filter, there'll be residue. And the cameras will have her on tape every time she did it." Dr. Fenwick lifted the handset from the wall and punched in a number. "I need Detective Brenda Strickland on the line right now. This is urgent. It concerns the Colton case." Behind me, the door pushed open. Derek walked in, face drawn, hollowed out by a night spent in a waiting room chair. The moment he registered that I was awake and coherent, something in his body let go. "Dad," he came straight to the bed. "They told me you were stable." He started to say more, then caught the look on Dr. Fenwick's face and stopped. "Your father has been poisoned with arsenic administered consistently over the past 3 weeks, Dr. Fenwick told him directly. He was aware of it and chose to let it continue so the evidence would be complete. Derek turned to look at me, and the tears he'd been locking down since the ambulance finally surfaced. "You sat there and let her do it," he said, barely above a whisper. "Week after week, knowing, and you just let her keep coming." "I'm an engineer," I said, closing my trembling fingers around his hand. "Everything comes down to risk calculation." The footage needed multiple documented incidents. Repetition converts accident into pattern. Pattern converts pattern into intent. And 4 weeks of recorded doses converts intent into murder. His tears landed on my hand, warm against skin that felt miles away. What I felt was something cooler, the quiet precision of a plan unfolding correctly. Every variable accounted for, every frame captured. You could have died doing this, Derek said, voice fracturing. You still might, I acknowledged. But even if that's how it ends, Celeste faces prosecution. I decided early on that was worth the risk. Dr. Fenwick concluded her call and addressed us both. Detective Strickland has the evidence files in front of her right now, she said. She'll be here to take a formal statement within the hour. On the bedside table sat my phone, the one Derek had retrieved from the house. Right on cue, the screen lit up. Text from Wendell. Upload complete. 47 video files. She's watching them now. 15 miles away in the parking lot of Macon Regional Medical Center, Detective Brenda Strickland had her laptop open on the passenger seat. Wendell's cloud transfer had completed 10 minutes prior. 47 files each tagged with a timestamp and sequence number. She clicked into the first one. June 23rd, 11:47 p.m. Gerald's kitchen filled the screenshot from the concealed cabinet camera. Crisp, steady, no ambiguity. Celeste Colton moved into frame with latex gloves already on. She went straight to the water filter, unscrewed the reservoir cap with the ease of someone who'd done it before, and stood there for nearly 30 seconds adding something before threading the lid back on. She cleaned the counter, slipped something into her jacket pocket, and walked out without a sound. 1 step, 2, 3 lid back on surface, wiped a single look over her shoulder toward the hallway where Gerald was supposed to be sleeping. Then the door closed behind her, soft as a held breath. Detective Strickland's hand moved toward her radio. There was nothing to argue with here. Derek's voice fractured when he described it to me later. Detective Strickland had viewed every one of those 47 files back to back. 3 weeks of Celeste poisoning me, rendered in frame-by-frame precision. She told him it was the most thoroughly documented, premeditated, attempted murder case she'd encountered in 20 years on the job. Derek said this standing next to my bed where the IV lines were still threaded into my arm and machines were still reading out what arsenic had done to my organs. Every frame sharp. Your face never appears, only hers, over and over. I had given 3 weeks of my body to produce that footage. Now flat on my back with the toxicology report spelling it out in black and white, the mechanism I'd engineered was doing exactly what I'd built it to do. The warrants came through fast. Derek relayed each update as his phone delivered them. Search teams are headed to both properties now, yours and ours. Our house, the one Derek had made a home. The life he'd believed in, not knowing his wife, had been quietly killing his father every Tuesday and Friday. Put her on speaker, I said, nodding at his phone. I want to hear it. Derek dialed. Detective Strickland's voice came through, steady and precise. Mr. Colton, we're positioned outside 312 Magnolia Lane with a search team, she said. The evidence package gave us grounds for immediate entry. Moving in now. I could make out other voices underneath hers. The crack of a door giving way. Shoe soles on hardwood floorboards I recognized from the day Derek first bought that house 5 years back. Kitchen sweep first, Detective Strickland told her team. Under the sink, the pantry, anywhere chemicals or pest products might be stowed. A brief quiet. Then a man's voice cutting through. Detective under the sink, rat poison, arsenic-based formulation, barely touched, bag it. Detective Strickland came back on. Hit the bathrooms too. Measuring doses takes precision, she'd want a room to herself for that. A pause. A door swinging open. Then detective, come look at this. Celeste's bathroom. Behind a stack of spare toilet paper in the cabinet, a small measuring spoon kept well apart from anything in the kitchen. Residue coating the bowl. Derek's eyes shut. His free hand locked onto the bed rail so hard the color left his knuckles. Master bedroom next, Detective Strickland said. Nightstands, dressers, drawers, anywhere she might keep something personal. A second voice lower. Detective, the Bible on the nightstand. Something's tucked in there. Lying in that bed, hearing strangers methodically dismantle the hidden architecture of my daughter-in-law's murder plan, I felt no anger, no grief, only the flat, clean satisfaction of a proof that checks out. Detective Strickland's voice returned, stripped of its professional edge for just a moment, careful, almost quiet. Mr. Colton, there's a journal, she said. Inside the Bible, every dose she added to your water written down by date and quantity, a deliberate escalating schedule covering 3 weeks. She logged your deterioration the way an engineer tracks a load test. What's the bookmark, I asked. I already knew Celeste had a taste for theater, even when the audience was no one. Psalm 37, Detective Strickland said after a beat. The wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. How many other women have sat in a pew with a Bible open calculating dosages between hymns? Everything holds, Detective Strickland said. 47 videos, toxicology confirmation, physical evidence recovered on site, and her own handwritten log. We're heading to First Heritage Community Bank now to freeze Conrad Ashby's accounts and get him talking. 20 minutes went by. Then Derek's phone rang again. Detective Strickland's voice had changed, compressed, clipped. They've run, she said, no lead up. The bank manager says Conrad pulled a large cash withdrawal last night, $48,300. We've got the security footage. Timestamp 6:14 this morning. Celeste and Conrad loading luggage into his black Audi, a tight embrace, then pulling away together. Derek looked at me, his face caught somewhere between betrayal and vindication. 6-hour head start, I said, running the numbers. They knew the evidence would come up once I went down. We're issuing an APB right now. Detective Strickland said every highway patrol unit across 3 states was watching for Conrad Ashby's black Audi. But Mr. Colton, if they staged this escape in advance, they did, I said. GPS tracker. Derek planted one in Celeste's luggage 2 weeks ago. Can you pull the signal? A pause. Then something new entered Detective Strickland's voice traction. Send me the tracking credentials now. Derek opened the GPS app, hands unsteady, and forwarded the login to Detective Strickland's email. 3 minutes of silence. Then she came back, voice clipped with urgency. Savannah/Hilton Head International Airport, she said. The Audi is sitting in long-term parking. Pulling up the flight manifest now. More silence, keys clicking somewhere in the background. Then 2 one-way tickets purchased this morning, Conrad Ashby and Celeste Colton. Flight 2847 to Charlotte, connecting to Grand Cayman Islands. Boarding in 90 minutes, Detective Strickland said. If they clear security and step onto that plane, extradition from the Caymans will take months. Maybe it never happens. I heard movement on her end, a car door and engine turning over. I'm 40 minutes out, she said. Airport security is being dispatched now. But if they're already past TSA, the suitcase, I said. The tracker. Security can locate them by the signal even if they're through the checkpoint. On it, Detective Strickland said, her engine audible beneath the words, a siren spinning up in the background. Mr. Colton, your daughter-in-law spent 3 agonizing weeks trying to kill you. She is not boarding a flight to the Caymans with your money. Derek's grip tightened on my hand, both of us listening to that siren through the phone. Nod. Flight boards at gate D14 in 87 minutes. Detective Strickland's voice had gone flat and focused. I want every security officer in that terminal moving toward the signal. No one gets on that plane until I say so. The line clicked over to hold music while she coordinated with the airport. I looked at Derek, at the tears still drying on his face, at the phone trembling in his grip. She's going to make it, I said. I wasn't sure I believed it. She has to, Derek whispered. The race was on. Derek's phone rang at 8:43. Detective Strickland's voice through the speaker so I could hear from the bed. We have them on thermal, she said, slightly breathless beneath the sound of sirens. GPS puts them at gate D14 checkpoint Bravo. TSA is holding the line. I let my eyes close. The IV dripped cold into my arm, and I felt something I hadn't permitted myself in weeks. Hope. Mr. Colton, Detective Strickland, went on whatever unfolds in the next 10 minutes. You made this happen. Your evidence. Your endurance. This arrest belongs to you. Derek pressed a hand to my shoulder. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm beside me, counting out the beats of a heart that had survived 3 weeks of deliberate, calculated poisoning. Go get them, I said quietly. The line stayed open. I heard everything. Detective Strickland's footsteps rang through the terminal, fast and purposeful. Gate D14. This is Detective Brenda Strickland of Warner Robins PD. I am on site with Savannah Airport Marshal Forces. We have active felony warrants for Celeste Colton and Conrad Ashby for attempted murder and grand larceny. Intercept them at checkpoint Bravo immediately. A male voice responded, composed and professional. Copy that, Detective. TSA Supervisor Ron Mitchell. We have eyes on 2 individuals matching your description at the metal detector. Female, late 20s, black hair. Male, mid-20s, brown hair, both with roller bags. That's them, Detective Strickland said. Hold them in place. Derek's hand pressed harder on my shoulder. I fixed my eyes on the ceiling tiles, seeing nothing, hearing everything. The metal detector beeped. Ma'am? The TSA supervisor's voice drifted through distant but distinct. I need to take a look at your bag. Step to the side, please. Celeste's voice sharp with panic. We're about to miss our flight. There's nothing in there but clothing. Standard procedure, ma'am. Sir, you as well. Both bags require secondary screening. I heard the zipper, the shift of fabric, then quiet. Ma'am, the supervisor said, his voice slowing. This bag is carrying approximately $48,000 in bundled currency. I'm going to need you to come with me to the security office. That's our money, Celeste snapped. Traveling with cash is completely legal. Amounts over $10,000 require declaration. You didn't declare it. And these bills? A pause. They're sequential. This has the look of a same-day bank withdrawal. Conrad's voice came through dull and defeated. Val, stop talking. Don't tell me to stop. Celeste Colton. Detective Strickland's voice cut through like a beam of light through smoke. Conrad Ashby. You are both under arrest, attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder, grand theft, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Hands behind your backs. The sound of handcuffs clicking into place was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. You can't do this, Celeste screamed. You have nothing on us. I have 47 videos of you tampering with Gerald Colton's water supply. Detective Strickland said, no heat in her voice at all. I have your handwritten records. I have chemical evidence pulled from your home. I have bank records documenting $70,500 taken. I have your tickets to a country with no extradition treaty. You want to keep talking, or do you want a lawyer? Silence. Then Celeste broke. You think I wanted this? Her voice fractured, hysteria flooding through. You think I wanted to hurt him? Ryland gave me 3 months or he'd kill Conrad. $80,000 and the clock was already running. I had no choice. Derek's eyes went wide. I felt my own breath stop. Who's Ryland? Detective Strickland asked, voice going sharp. Ryland Decker. Celeste sobbed. Conrad owed him from a poker game in Atlanta. $80,000. And Ryland doesn't accept IOUs. He told me if I didn't produce the money by September, he'd... Her voice dissolved into crying. Conrad said nothing. His silence was its own confession. Ma'am, Detective Strickland said, you're telling me there's a third party involved in this conspiracy. I didn't conspire, Celeste wailed. I just needed to save my husband by murdering his father. The words hung there in the air like a verdict already handed down. Derek ended the call. The hospital room felt impossibly still after the noise of the airport. He looked at me, his expression a compound of relief and rage. Dad, he said quietly, it's over. But I was already fixed on the name Celeste had screamed. Ryland Decker, $80,000. A poker debt that had come within days of killing me. My son believed the story closed with handcuffs at a departure gate. I knew otherwise. The woman who'd spent 3 weeks poisoning my water, draining my accounts, dismantling my life, she hadn't been the architect. She'd been a tool, and somewhere in Atlanta the man who'd put her to work was still moving freely. Detective Strickland called back 20 minutes later. Mr. Colton, both suspects are in custody and en route to Warner Robins. We'll need your formal statement once you're medically cleared, but for now you're safe. They can't reach you anymore. Detective, I said, my voice even despite the fatigue pressing down on me. What about Ryland Decker? We're looking into it, she said, choosing her words. If Celeste's account holds up, this investigation just expanded considerably. I closed my eyes again. The machines beeped. The IV ran its slow drip. My body was mending. But the engineer in me, the part that had spent a lifetime diagnosing failures, constructing systems, solving what needed solving, was already working. $80,000, a gambling debt, a man willing to arrange a killing for money. Celeste and Conrad were taken. Ryland Decker was not, and I wasn't finished. Victory has a taste copper and antiseptic when you've poisoned yourself to catch a thief. Dr. Fenwick's damage assessment sat in my lap like a bill for services rendered. 3 days since the airport arrest. 3 days since I had allowed myself to think the worst was behind me. Dr. Audra Fenwick stood at the foot of my bed, tablet in hand, her face carefully composed. Your liver enzymes are leveling off, she said, moving through the results. But the kidney damage is real and it's significant. You intentionally allowed someone to poison you for 3 weeks. I calculated acceptable risk. I said, my voice still roughened from the intubation tube they'd pulled yesterday. I'm an engineer. I understood the variables. She raised her eyes from the tablet. Mr. Colton, you nearly died. The road ahead is 2 months of pain, slow recovery, and frustration. Are you ready for that? Derek sat in the chair beside the bed, looking like the past week had aged him 10 years. I'm ready, I said. Dr. Fenwick moved to the next screen. Your toxicology numbers on admission were alarming, contamination reading at 4.3 when 5 is the threshold for irreversible organ failure. She let that number sit a moment. Another week of exposure, possibly even 3 more days, and you would not have come back from it. Permanent damage or worse. You were very close, Mr. Colton. Derek's hand gripped the chair arm. The weight of what she'd said settled over the room. 1 more week. I had planned to hold out for 2 more. How soon can I go home, I asked. A minimum of 2 weeks. Then outpatient physical therapy, weekly blood draws, medication management. Full recovery is 3 to 6 months, assuming no setbacks. The peripheral neuropathy in your hands and feet may be permanent. The tremors, the pins and needles crawling through my fingertips, the weakness pooling in my legs. I'd exchanged 18 months of evidence building for 6 months of rebuilding myself. The math still held. 5 days after the arrest, I managed to sit upright without support for the first time. It shouldn't have registered as an achievement. I was 60 years old, a man who'd spent 4 decades on scaffolding, drawing blueprints, hauling steel. Sitting up should have been nothing. Instead, it demanded every fragment of concentration I could muster. Derek stood next to the bed, arms folded. Dad, you don't have to prove anything. Take the time you need. I endured 3 agonizing weeks of deliberate poisoning, I said through clenched teeth, muscles shaking with the effort. I could manage sitting up. My body had other opinions. The room pitched sideways. My hands pressed unsteadily into the mattress, fingers numb and awkward. I felt the poison's signature in each nerve, every hollowed-out muscle, every breath that cost just a little too much. The tremors ease as the nervous system repairs itself, the nurse said, adjusting the IV line. Her name tag read Martinez. This is normal, Mr. Colton. Normal. As if being poisoned by your daughter-in-law fit anywhere on the spectrum of ordinary. As if recovering from attempted murder was just another entry in a geriatric care chart. Day 7. I stood for the first time gripping the walker's handles until my knuckles blanched. Derek hovered at my elbow, one hand raised and ready. I've got it, I said. I know. But he didn't step back. The walker felt like a sentence. 6 decades of self-sufficiency distilled into 4 aluminum legs and rubber feet. I shifted my weight, testing what remained. My legs held barely. The neuropathy made my feet feel like they belonged to someone else, something muffled and far away. Every muscle burned just to stay vertical. 10 steps, I said. That's the target for today. Derek nodded. I'll be at the end of the hallway. He moved ahead, planting himself 10 steps down the corridor, arms loose at his sides, gaze fixed on mine, waiting. I took the first step. Pain fired through my calves, sharp electric. The walker scraped against the tile. My vision softened at the edges. 1, 2. The corridor looked impossibly long. 10 steps might as well have been 10 miles. 3, 4. Something in Derek's eyes that I hadn't seen since he was 12. The belief that his father could handle anything, even the unsurvivable. 5. My palms slipped on the grip, sweat making them treacherous. My legs were demanding rest they weren't going to get. The tremors built with every movement. 6, 7. I thought about Celeste in handcuffs at the airport screaming her justifications. I thought about Conrad silent and hollowed out. I thought about Ryland Decker still free somewhere. 8, 9, almost there, Dad. Derek said it quietly. 10. I stopped, breathing hard. Only the walker keeping me off the floor. Derek moved toward me, hands out. We stood there, father and son, the distance between us measured now in pain and stubbornness. 10 steps today, I said, voice rough. Tomorrow 12. I'm proud of you, Dad, not just for this, for everything. I didn't do this for pride, I said. I did it because she needed to answer for what she did. Derek's expression changed. Something complicated working behind his eyes. Grief, maybe, or the guilt of a man who hadn't seen it happening in his own house. She'll answer for it, he said. Detective Strickland arrived as I eased back down into the walker. She stood at the far end of the hallway, a folder tucked against her side face, giving nothing away. Derek spotted her first, his shoulders tightening. Mr. Colton, she said, walking toward us. There's news. I waited hard, working harder than it should have been. Ryland Decker was arrested this morning in Atlanta. Detective Strickland said federal wire fraud conspiracy to commit murder extortion. 12 other victims. Conrad wasn't his first mark. The relief moved through me quickly, sharp and unannounced. The prosecutor's office is putting a deal on the table for Celeste and Conrad. she went on, opening the folder. 20 years with parole eligibility in exchange for testimony against Decker. Without them, the murder conspiracy charge doesn't stick. Derek let out something low and sharp. 20 years she tried to kill him with cooperation. Yes, without the deal they're facing life without parole, but Decker walks free on the conspiracy count. Detective Strickland held out a document. We need your victim impact statement by Friday, Mr. Colton. Arraignment is in 2 weeks. I looked down at the paper shaking in my hands. Official letterhead, legal language, and a blank space waiting for my words. 18 months of trust corroded, 3 weeks of calculated poisoning, 6 months of recovery still ahead of me. How do you put a number to that in a courtroom? I'll have it ready, I said. Detective Strickland gave a short nod. Good, because this time we're putting all 3 of them away. She turned and walked back up the hallway footsteps, marking the tile. I stood there gripping the Walker body, spent mind already working through what words could possibly account for what had been taken from me. 10 steps down a hospital hallway, Derek at the far end with his arms out. I'd walked through worse, and I'd walked through this. But first I had a statement to write. How do you put a value on what you nearly lost when the accountant in you only knows dollars, but your heart already knows the answer? It's one. One son, one chance. One blanket pulled over sleeping shoulders at 3 a.m. I sat up in the hospital bed that evening, a legal pad across my knees, pen shaking in my grip. Friday's plea hearing was close. The prosecutor had been plain about it. Victim impact statements carry real weight. Tell the court what was taken from you. I'd already written 3 drafts. The first, a clinical ledger of stolen funds and organ damage. The second, a list of betrayals delivered with anger. The third, a line-by-line reconstruction of every offense. All accurate, all completely beside the point. Dad, it doesn't have to be perfect, Derek said from his chair beside the bed. He'd barely left the room in 3 weeks. Just say what she took. I can list every dollar, every organ, every day of health that's gone, I said, looking down at the yellow paper. But that's not the thing she actually stole. Then what did she steal? I looked at him. Hair unkempt, shirt, creased, exhaustion etched into his face. 3 weeks he'd put his entire life on hold to sit in this room. I don't know how to write it yet, I said quietly. The truth was simpler than any dollar figure and more devastating. I couldn't say what I'd almost lost, because I'd spent 20 years failing to recognize its value in the first place. Derek stood and stretched. I'm heading to the cafeteria. You want anything, I'm fine. Back in 20 minutes. He left. The room settled into hospital silence, machines beeping, fluorescent lights carrying their low hum. I picked up the pen again. To the court I began. The defendant stole, I stopped, crossed it out. Celeste hadn't only stolen money. She'd stolen time. Months of health I won't reclaim. The simple dignity of pouring a glass of water without running a calculation in the back of my mind. But even that wasn't the center of it. I put the pen down and closed my eyes, exhaustion taking hold. I came awake at 3 a.m. Pain radiating through my kidneys, sharp and bright enough to pull me out of sleep. The room was dark except for the monitor's soft glow and parking lot light pressing through the blinds. Derek was asleep in the chair, head dropped at a bad angle. 3 weeks he'd been in this room. 3 weeks away from work, his apartment, his life. I watched him sleep, this son I'd raised, with deliberate distance, convinced that independence was a form of respect, and that space was the same thing as love. The engineer in me had constructed systems to protect him. A college fund trust, accounts, life insurance, the full scaffolding of financial security. But I'd neglected the foundation. 18 months of her poisoning, yet I'd been poisoning something else for 20 years. The realization landed like a physical blow. All that time I'd congratulated myself for not being a burden, for solving problems quietly, for modeling self-sufficiency. What I'd actually been doing was building walls and calling them character. I'd calculated acceptable risk with arsenic and never once calculated what emotional distance was costing us. It turns out both are measured by what they remove from you, one cell at a time. Celeste had tried to kill me for money, but I'd been slowly killing something worth more through simple neglect, the connection that gives survival a reason. This terrible reckoning, organ damage, months of recovery, 3 weeks in a hospital bed had delivered an understanding I should have reached without any of it. Derek shifted in his sleep, settling uncomfortably. The hospital chair wasn't designed for nights. He had a perfectly good apartment 20 minutes away, a real bed, his own life. Instead, he was here. What I felt was gratitude that pressed up against devastation. Not for the evidence he'd helped collect, not for the detective work or the legal coordination, but for 3 weeks in an uncomfortable chair because leaving his father alone was not an option he was willing to take. I pushed myself upright through the pain. The walker stood beside the bed. I gripped it, tested my weight, stood. My hands shook. My legs threatened to give. Every step felt like moving across broken glass. But I crossed the room, 5 painful steps to Derek's chair. I pulled the thin hospital blanket from the foot of the bed, shook it open, and draped it quietly over his sleeping form, tucking it around his shoulders the way I hadn't done since he was 12. He shifted slightly, but didn't come awake. I stood there a moment, hands locked on the walker, looking at my son, this man who'd inherited my stubbornness and my caution, and who would hopefully in time inherit my capacity to learn from my mistakes. Then I turned and made the slow, painful crossing, back to the bed, lifted the legal pad, and wrote. The value of what I almost lost cannot be measured in dollars. My hands grew steadier as the words found their shape. Celeste Colton didn't only poison my body, she nearly stole the time I still needed to learn how to be his father again. 20 years I kept my distance, persuading myself that independence was its own kind of love. 3 weeks he has refused to walk out of this room. That's the equation that matters. I wrote about the blanket, the chair, the punishing angles, and the unwavering loyalty. I wrote about what no bank statement or medical report can capture, the cost of almost losing the chance to finally grasp what you've had in your hands the whole time. Dawn light was seeping through the window by the time I finished reworking the statement. It wasn't about money or poison anymore. It was about time and about the son asleep under a hospital blanket I had come within days of never pulling over him again. My phone rang at 6:15. Mr. Colton, this is Prosecutor Diane Loring. I'm sorry for the early hour, but Judge Claiborne moved the hearing up. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I sat up straighter. Celeste Colton requested the change. She wants to address you directly before entering the plea. A pause. Are you well enough to be there? Derek stirred beneath the blanket, beginning to surface. Yes, I said, watching my son wake. I'm well enough. Good. Bring your statement. This finishes tomorrow. She rang off. Morning light filled the room. Derek opened his eyes, registered the blanket draped over him, and looked across at me. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing that needed saying. I didn't attend my would-be killer's sentencing in person because the man who required that confrontation had died. Somewhere between the 3rd week of arsenic and the 3 a.m. moment, I covered my sleeping son with a borrowed blanket. 6 weeks post-collapse, I sat upright in the hospital bed without help, watching the courthouse feed on the wall-mounted screen. Derek stood to my left, Wendell Pruitt to my right. Both had come an hour early. Neither was willing to let me watch this by myself. Before it starts, Derek said, holding up his tablet, you need to look at this. He opened the Colton Systems financials. I braced for the damage. She took $48,300 in company funds, ran up another $12,000 against the credit line. We had to temporarily lay off 3 employees. He moved to the next screen. But 7 major clients expanded their contracts once news of what happened got out. They said they wanted their business with a company that holds to its principles when it's costly to do so. Revenue is up 12%, Dad. Wendell nodded. A crisis shows you what a person is made of. What yours revealed is worth investing in. The screen shifted. The courthouse feed came live. Judge Harriet Claiborne presiding, a composed woman in her late 50s, iron gray hair, reading glasses set low on her nose. All rise, the bailiff called. Celeste walked into frame in an orange jumpsuit flanked by her defense attorney, wrists cuffed, hair drawn back, face drained of color. She looked reduced somehow, diminished. 6 weeks earlier, I would have needed to be in that room, needed to see her face as she answered for it. Watching through a screen felt right now. She was already behind glass, already receding into the past. I don't need to be in that courtroom, I said quietly. Justice doesn't require me to witness it up close anymore. Derek glanced over, understanding in his expression. Judge Claiborne arranged her papers. We are convened for the plea and sentencing of Celeste Colton and Conrad Ashby. Prosecutor Loring, proceed. Diane Loring rose, her voice level. Your Honor, the state recommends acceptance of the plea agreements. The defendants cooperated in the prosecution of Ryland Decker, who was convicted last week. 12 years federal facility. I hadn't known Decker's sentence had come in. 12 years. The man pulling the strings had finally been caught. The defendant, Celeste Colton, Prosecutor Loring, went on, maintained a written log of poison doses concealed inside a Bible. Methodical, premeditated, attempted murder. The state has 47 videos documenting her administering arsenic over a period of 3 weeks. Celeste's defense attorney, Robert Shepard, rose. Your Honor, my client acted under severe duress. Ryland Decker threatened her husband's life. Duress is not a defense for attempted murder, Counselor. Judge Claiborne said it evenly. Particularly not 3 weeks of calculated sustained poisoning. Shepard sat. The defense had nowhere left to stand. Miss Colton, do you understand the terms of the plea agreement? 22 years parole eligibility after 18. Yes, Your Honor. Do you wish to address the court or your victim before sentencing? Silence. Celeste kept her gaze on the floor, wouldn't look at the camera, couldn't face what she'd done even through a lens. No, Your Honor, she said barely above a whisper. Judge Claiborne's gavel struck. 22 years, no parole eligibility for 18. Bailiff remanded the defendant. Conrad Ashby's sentencing followed. Conspiracy and bank fraud, 12 years. He stood mute and defeated, the same as he'd been at the airport. I sat in silence after the screen went dark, a sobering thought settling in. There are countless vulnerable people out there facing threats exactly like this one, with no tools, no technical knowledge, and no means of building the kind of proof that brings it to light. Justice served, Wendell said. 22 years is a long time. Wendell drew a folder from his briefcase. Gerald, there's something here you should look at. 3 cases in 6 months, all Macon area, all elderly victims, all exploited by family members, all financial abuse, none with evidence strong enough to prosecute. I opened the folder. 3 victim profiles. Agnes Porter, 72 daughter, had taken retirement funds. No proof. Harold Brennan, 68 nephew, drained his accounts. Evidence insufficient. Margaret Quinn, 75 caretaker, embezzled her savings. Suspected, never charged. 3 files spread across the bed. Wendell had brought me the blueprint for what comes after surviving building systems to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. I used 35 years of engineering to protect myself, I said. Most people don't have that. Derek leaned in. So we build it for them. Camera systems, account monitoring, pattern recognition. We take what you survived and turn it into armor for someone else. The shape of it came into focus. Not just recovering from what had happened, using it to stop it from happening again. A foundation, I said. Technology-based elder protection. Low-cost monitoring. Automated alerts. Documentation protocols. Wendell smiled. I can get you in front of funding sources, grants, private donors, corporate sponsors. We have the technical side covered, Derek said. I can design the system architecture. The manufacturing contacts can produce at cost. The hospital room changed without anyone moving. It was no longer a place of recovery. It had become a room where something was being planned. Derek went to the whiteboard and started sketching system diagrams. Wendell opened his notebook and began mapping legal structures. I watched them work and felt something that had been gone for years. Purpose that had nothing to do with profit. Celeste had come for my life and my money. Instead, she'd handed me a reason to build something that would outlast me. Wendell gathered his files. I'll bring the full case documentation next week. These 3 families need help now. Derek kept sketching the whiteboard, filling up with network architecture. I turned toward the window. A Macon sunset was spreading orange and purple across the sky. 6 weeks ago, I'd lain in a bed and wondered whether I'd see another one. Now I was mapping out what to do with however many remained. When you're given a second chance, the question isn't why you survived. It's what you're going to build with it. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Colton, this is Clifton Haverford with Southeastern Life Insurance, calling about your $500,000 policy. I felt the tension move through me, the policy Celeste had taken out, naming herself as beneficiary. We're reversing the cancellation, Haverford continued. Your case has set a legal precedent. Attempted murder voids a beneficiary's claim. The policy is yours, Mr. Colton. If you'd like to put it toward whatever I'm hearing you're building, I'd call that poetic justice. I looked at Derek, still working at the board, at the 3 victim files on the bed, at the sky beyond the window. Yes, I said. I want it. The money set aside to pay for my death would now go toward protecting others from theirs. The foundation office smelled like fresh paint and something that felt like possibility. December 2024. 6 months after arsenic had almost finished me, I stood at a podium in a borrowed community room, 37 folding chairs, a secondhand microphone, and the life insurance money meant to reward my murder, now repurposed as seed funding to guard strangers. Derek adjusted the stand. 5 minutes, Dad. Ready, I said. I didn't give them the full account that evening. They'd already carried enough of their own grief. I gave them the part that mattered, that I had sat exactly where they were sitting, frightened, cut off from everyone, certain that speaking up would only make it worse. Silence protects the predator, I said. Evidence protects the family. 3 people came forward afterward. Dorothy Richardson, 74, whose grandson had been skimming small amounts for months. She couldn't prove it, and she was rationing her medication as a result. Eugene Foster, 69, holding forged checks his daughter kept promising to repay 8 months and counting. Linda Carmichael, 76, whose niece had moved in under the guise of helping and stayed to threaten. 3 faces that looked the way mine had looked 6 months earlier. Derek stood next to me with his tablet, already booking site visits. Wendell recorded every name, every case number, every detail that would become the Foundation's first official intake files. 1 week after that, Bibb County presented me with its Outstanding Citizen Award. I accepted it and said exactly what I meant. The award belonged to my son, who never once left my bedside, to Wendell, who built the evidence system that kept me alive, and to every victim with the courage to speak when silence felt like the only safe option. If you've stayed with me through all of this, thank you, truly. This one was not easy to carry, and I imagine it wasn't easy to hear. Looking back, what strikes me most isn't the poison or the courtroom or the handcuffs at the gate. It's the 3 weeks I lay in a hospital bed and finally understood what I'd been too stubborn to see for 20 years. My son never left that room, not once. I believe God put him there, not just to save my life, but to give me the chance to be the father I should have been all along. What Celeste took from me in those 3 weeks, I can never fully recover. What she gave me by forcing the truth into the light that I'll carry differently. If these grandpa revenge stories have taught me anything, it's this. First, document everything always. A feeling is not a case. Evidence is. Second, if something in your gut says the numbers don't add up, trust that instinct and check the accounts yourself. Do not wait for someone else to tell you. Third, distance is not the same as strength. The people who love you need access to you, not just proof that you can manage alone. Fourth, the quietest room in the house can hold the loudest betrayal. Stay curious about what you cannot see. These father stories don't always end in courtrooms, but this one did, and I hope it reminds you that it is never too late to build something better out of what tried to break you. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave me a comment, tell me what hit hardest, or just say hello. And if you haven't yet, come join us here on Grandpa's Revenge. New stories go up regularly, and every one of them matters. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.